The two of us just stood there, looking at each other for a moment. It was a moment that seemed to go on forever, but I knew it couldn't have been longer than about 5 seconds. His hand was shaking a little, something I only noticed because the barrel of the gun wobbled so much. He had tried to act tough while he drove me around in the back of his cop car, but I doubted this man had ever actually had to shoot anyone. Not by himself. I'm sure the mayor had pushed him a few times to execute someone for getting nosy, but this was the first time that would be on his head, and he knew it. "Drop the jar and put your hands in the air," he said, and his gulp was audible. I looked at the jar and then looked at the vial in my other hand. If that's what he wanted, then I guess that's what he was going to get. Quicker than he had expected, I threw the jar at him and ran towards the door that would take me out front of the cannery. He fired, but the bullet missed me by a good 10 feet. That sounds like a lot, but it was still enough to make my spine try to curl up as the corrugated wall behind me made an angry sound when the bullet passed through it. The jar hit him in the chest, but when he started yelling, I realized that some of it might have hit him a little higher. I turned my head just for a second and saw him clawing at his face as the gun fell from his hand. It had definitely splashed him, and I wondered just how corrosive the stuff was. I didn't have long to wonder, because I was out front a moment later, and the evening air hit me in the face. I made a sound like an angry cat, and had to remind myself not to shake my hand and throw the sample away. It burned. It burned like acid, and I reached into my pocket as I ran, trying to find something to cap the tube with. What I came up with was a piece of paper towel that I had in my jacket pocket, and I prayed it would be enough to keep it inside as I put the vial into the same pocket. Behind me, the whole world was erupting into sound and fury. People were yelling, engines were roaring to life, someone was yelling for a medic, and I could hear footsteps as people started running into the woods behind me. I was still in good enough shape to outdistance most anybody that was pursuing me, but I was also winded and scared and had no idea where I was going. For all I knew, I might come face to face with one of the foresters, and that would be very bad. The people in the cannery would kill me, but they'd probably do it quickly. I didn't like to think about what would happen if one of those creatures got their hands on me. It would be pretty bad, that was certain, but how bad was still up in the air. A tree made a weird noise to my left, and I realized that someone had started shooting at me. The forest was suddenly awash with light as the cannery turned on its spotlights and started hunting for me in the woods. I didn't have time to worry about the foresters. I had to get the hell out of there. I kept running, kept weaving, kept moving between the trees, and before long, I didn't hear anybody behind me. It was a wonder that I'd made it out at all, and when I saw a familiar trail, I took it. Somehow I had managed to find myself on the path that Tera and I had taken to get out of here. I got low, and I started moving quietly as I made my way back to the truck. I had a lot to think about as I made my way out. What the hell were these people doing? They were making the poison to keep the beetles at bay, but I suddenly wondered if that was all they were doing. If they were just making pesticide, then why be so secretive about it? If they were helping the town, then why not let everyone know? The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The town would celebrate them for what they were doing. They would probably give them people to help. They would probably give them a place in town to do it, but instead they were out in the woods in the middle of the night, doing something that none of them really understood. No, the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I stopped suddenly when I heard a branch break, and I got as low as I could. Somebody got closer to my location. I knew how to go unnoticed. I knew how to stay out of sight, But these people had lived here their whole lives and had likely been in the woods more often than I had. They knew the night sounds, and they knew what they were looking for. I hunkered down behind a tree, putting my back to it in case I had to sprint off in a hurry. And that was probably the only reason that I caught as much as I did. "Could have sworn he came this way," said a male voice that I didn't know. "Did you see what he did to the sheriff?" came a female voice that I thought I knew, but I couldn't place. "That's why they're so anal about safety gear. You saw the burn marks, right? That could be any of us. I told them 100 times that the stuff is dangerous, and they need to swap to something less caustic. It's the only thing that kills the beetles." "Yeah, and it kills us, too. You saw how many of us canners get cancer, and you know that's no coincidence. This shit's killing us, too. And for what? We put enough poison in the ground at this point that the beetles may never come back. We just keep pumping because the mayor tells us to. What other choice do we have? You know that's the price of operating on Main Street. Besides, the beetles destroy the crops. Everybody knows that. Without the poison, we're back to starving to death like we were a generation ago." "Yeah, well, there's more to it than that, I think." But whatever the familiar voice thought was lost as they moved back towards the cannery and away from my location. I breathed out gently, not daring to exhale the way I wanted to. I'd probably come within a hair's breadth of being shot, and such a thing would have definitely put a damper on my plans to get whatever this stuff was tested. I nearly cried out as a sudden heat hit me in the stomach, and I put my hand into my pocket to feel the tingle of the vial's contents seeping into the cloth of my hoodie. I tore it off and threw it on the ground, watching as the substance ate through the fabric and started dissolving the fibers. I reached in gingerly and grabbed the vial, now with only a little bit of residue at the bottom, and carefully wiped it off on the grass before holding it in my hand. The sacrifices I made for this town, my sleep, a sweatshirt, the bill was really racking up. I jogged a little down the path that would lead me back to my truck, and when I was suddenly hit by a pair of headlights, I thought for sure that the next thing I would feel would be a bullet coming in my direction. I thought about cutting left back into the woods, but if they had guns trained on me, they'd have me dead to rights in a matter of minutes. All I could do was sit there like a deer in headlights and wait for the shot to come. "Are you going to get in this truck, or are you going to continue to play statue out there?" came a harsh whisper as the lights cut out, and I realized it was Terry. He must have sprinted out just as they were chasing me, because he had managed to get to the truck before I did. I ran to the passenger side door, and there he was, sitting behind the wheel as if he hadn't just run for his life in the woods at night. He held out a plastic bag, the kind of thing you would seal leftovers in, and I put the vial into it as I got into the truck. I didn't think it would hold up, but there wasn't a lot of the substance left in it anyway. I hoped he could get something off of what was left, because I certainly wasn't going back for more. "Were you seen?" he asked, as he put the truck in reverse and pulled out. "Yeah, but I lost him," I said, trying to catch my breath as the comfort of the worn truck seat finally caught up with me. "Did the sheriff see you?" he asked, and I understood the implications. I had to think about that. If the sheriff had seen me and recognized me, he didn't acknowledge it by name. I was sure that by now he had more things on his mind than the identity of some guy in a hoodie, but I couldn't really be sure. It had been dark, and I'd been dressed in black with my hood up, so it was very likely that he hadn't seen me. Even so, you didn't get to be sheriff of a town like this by collecting bottle caps, and it was very likely that he had recognized me. "I don't know," I said, before I could let it rattle around for too long. "Well, I guess if we get black-bagged in the middle of the night, then that'll answer my question. If you're involved, then he'll have to know that I'm involved too, and nowhere in town will be safe for us. I guess we'll just have to hope that he didn't see your face." "Did you see what that stuff did to him?" I asked, as we pulled back onto the road and started making our way for home. Terry was quiet for a minute, and then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Yeah, I got a pretty good look when you threw the stuff at him. He's definitely not going to be winning any beauty contests, and I suspect it might make it a little harder to pick up women down at Buster's with that hole in his face." That prompted me to look down at my hands, and I was shocked to find that what I'd had on my fingers looked like second-degree burns. It honestly looked like I'd gotten a really bad grease burn without all the silly bubbling. The skin had darkened and begun to scar over, and I shuddered to think what it might do if I didn't get it treated. I pulled up my shirt and looked at my stomach, but it appeared that it had only eaten at the hoodie and had left me alone. Seems a little bit of overkill for some bugs. Terry nodded. "Seems like a lot of overkill for bugs. Seems like we might want to get it tested and find out what exactly they're doing with it. We have to make it home first, though, and the night is still young." As we drove through the dark and tried to make our way back to town ahead of our pursuers, I wondered how much longer we could get away with this. I had only to think about the conversation I had heard, as well as the way those chemicals had sizzled, to know it didn't matter. Something had to change here, and that something was going to have to start pretty damn quick. Rayford had a lot of secrets, and the town wouldn't last much longer if those secrets continued to rot the place that I call home. "I would suggest that you let me board my plane and go back to the Bureau. I've wasted a lot of time here. Unlike your time, my time is very important to the people of this country." He left them grumbling, some of them outright demanding that he come back and do something. Director hires did not work for these men. In his opinion, they had rather too high an opinion of themselves. They believed that their wealth and their prestige made them important, made them untouchable. But men like this always had weak points. They indulge in things that would get them sent to prison. They aren't as good with their taxes as they would have you believe. And they may even be laundering money for people worse than they are. If Director Hires wanted to, he could set quite a few dogs sniffing their back trail. But he didn't have time for all that. Right now, people were continuing to die around the world, and he needed to figure out why. Scratch that. He knew why. He just needed to find out how. The CD in his coat pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as he walked out of the business office and stuck out his hand to hail a cab. He should have been back in Washington yesterday, but he had to stick around for this asinine meeting with the board of directors. It was an absolute waste of time. They had expected him to fall to his knees and get on his face and tell them how sorry he was that one of his agents had inconvenienced them and set their work back. Given the evidence that Warwick had collected, it was quite possible that he had saved the studio a lot of time and a lot of money in the long run. If that broadcast had gone off, it was very likely that they would be dealing with 2 such events right now. There was no way of proving that, but Hires felt quite sure that his agent's sacrifice had been to stop what could have been even more catastrophic than Jarrett's dirge. The cab pulled up, and Director Hires climbed into the back as he situated himself. "Where to, buddy?" "Airport, please." "You got it. Hey, did you know that Jarrett first played the guitar when he was..." Director Hires tuned the man down as they rolled towards LAX. The cabbie would be dead in a couple of days. Once they started sharing facts about the artist, they were usually dead in about 7 days. He needed to get back to Washington. He needed to figure out what the hell was going on.
Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's show.
Everything changed the day that Jarrett Ray killed himself. He'd been a YouTube star, an internet darling, and his life had been a TV show since he picked up a guitar. The video of an 8-year-old Jarrett Ray learning his chords was still on his Memories channel. The sight of him playing beside his granddad, the old man smiling and cackling as the young boy devoured his lessons, was tear-jerking. People talked about how you could just tell so-and-so was happy because it was written all over their face. Well, it was true in his case. Bobby Ray, Jarrett's granddad, was truly happy when he watched his grandson play those first halting chords from the chair beside him. He'd tell Jarrett 10 years later, his hands and muscles withered from cancer, that teaching him to play had been his proudest achievement. Police have found another apparent suicide in Little Brine today. This brings the death toll into the thousands, with numbers in the millions expected by the end of day. Leslie looked up from the tea she'd been making and sighed. All this because some stupid tart couldn't tell when she was supposed to be ashamed. Leslie had been watching the reports come in all day. After the video had gone viral, it was all anyone could do to keep up with the death toll. All this over a song, she thought. All this because someone wrote a song. But it was more than a song, of course. He'd won his 5th grade talent show, his 6th grade talent show, and his 7th grade talent show as well. By the time he was in 8th grade, the administration had simply let him close the show. Every year, he wrote a new song just for the occasion, and many of them made their way onto his albums after he was discovered. During the interviews they did for the documentary, his classmates spoke about him with tears in their eyes. They said there would never be anyone like Jarrett ever again, that when Jarrett sang, it was like he was singing just for you. Like he was the only other person in the world. The numbers are only now starting to solidify. 750,000 deaths worldwide, with another 5 million expected by the end of day. This is a global crisis, and the numbers are only just beginning to come in. Of the nearly 7.5 million people worldwide who watched the video, only those reported dead have been discovered. Which begs the question, when will the others surface? Leslie had to watch the news on her old cable TV. She had turned off the router and the modem hours ago. Leslie couldn't risk Sophia. She'd put the thought out of her head. If she couldn't get on her tablet, she'd come out here. There would be no reason for her not to. She'd been home with a fever today, so she'd slept through most of the news reports. Some small part of Leslie was glad that she had managed to cloister her. If she had been at school when the video went live, who knew? Jarrett had started his rise to fame as many others did. He recorded himself singing and playing the guitar and posted it to YouTube. He was a moderate success. The people from his hometown pushed his numbers a little, but he never rose above a few thousand views. When they announced YouTube Talent, an invitation for YouTubers to send in their best and try to get discovered, he submitted a video and found the audience he'd been seeking. The adoration he'd found for his music at school was multiplied by 1 billion, and from there the sky was the limit for Jarrett. His music touched people, made them discover things they never knew they'd lost. Leslie could remember fondly when one of his songs would come on the radio at work. For the 2 or 3 minutes that he sang, it was like no one could have a bad day. No one could be in anything less than a fantastic mood, and the world was just a little brighter while he was in it. He was their songbird, but they ultimately took him for granted. Deaths have reached a catastrophic level. 3 million people dead, and somehow the views just keep rising. The death toll is now expected to be somewhere around 250 million before the end, as people go to see what all the fuss is about. News outlets are begging viewers not to indulge their curiosity, as the video has been confirmed to have a nearly 100% kill rate thus far. He met Crystal while guest hosting Saturday Night Live. She had a track record for loving and leaving influencers, breaking their hearts, taking their money if they were dumb enough to marry her. She seemed to have her eyes set on Jarrett. Their love affair was one for the tabloids, a string of fights and makeups and public declarations of love or anger. She wanted to be a musician, it seemed, and even the middling talent she had couldn't pull down his star. She appeared with him on several albums, came on stage with him at concerts, but at the end of the day, it was Jarrett they all came to see, and she knew it and hated it. She was 24 years old, a time bomb who was about to destroy the world with her need for attention. When she left him after 5 years together, the world sighed with relief. They gasped, however, when she accused him of abuse. She had bruises, a very convincing black eye, and an ear from a tabloid writer who told her whole story, glaring prose and glossy pictures. She made the talk show circuit, talking about her harrowing experience and her toxic relationship. Eventually, Jarrett was called upon to defend himself in the court of public opinions. It was crap, he claimed. She had left because she had ultimately gotten everything out of their relationship that she could, other than his name. He was tired of putting up with her tantrums and her public spectacles, and was ready to move on with his life. Their relationship was not a sustainable one, and he was looking for more than someone who made bad press with him. They had drifted apart, and it was time to move on to better things. He was reasonable. He was adult about the whole matter. But people don't want reasonable, not even from a media darling like him. She cried and pouted, while he sat and reasonably explained, and the audience ate their daily dose of drama. We have reports of a group of students on the roof of a high school in Des Moines. Unresponsive to verbal commands, they are ignoring police, and oh God, they've jumped. As emergency services tries to save who they can, we can see more students coming out of the emergency hatch and preparing to join their fellow students. His reputation was ruined. There was never any proof that he had or hadn't hurt Crystal, but she fashioned her story into a lucrative book deal and a successful music career. Jarrett, on the other hand, was damaged goods. He was unbookable, his sales plummeted, and his songs slowly stopped playing on the radio. It seemed that no one wanted to be seen supporting a suspected abuser, and his star had now begun to fall. The 3 years would see him in and out of rehab, falling hard into drug use and depression, and when he came out, he went back to YouTube with something very different. Reports are coming in about a group of men who have set themselves on fire in Kyoto. Their dying is quiet, dignified, and they burn without so much as a whimper, Kyoto authorities say. When he returned, his music wasn't the same. The upbeat, happy songs full of hope were replaced with melancholy ballads full of despair and hopelessness. Someone sent her one of his YouTube links once, and she could swear that you could feel the air being sucked out of the room. He conveyed every ounce of his suffering into his music, and though his views were just as high as they had always been, no one talked about his music now. His song was a monster that was better left under the bed. No one wanted to listen, but their curiosity wouldn't let them look away. We have cell phone footage of 3 men jumping into a cave in Arizona National Park. The cave mouth, usually requiring climbers to rappel down to reach the floor, is nearly a mile deep. Emergency services are still attempting to get the bodies, and 2 members of EMS are said to have also jumped. 2 days ago, he had made his last YouTube video. He finished something haunting, halting, tears streaming down his cheeks as he poured his soul into every note. He played acoustically, and his guitar was not tuned. The jangling melody of his untuned strings was ethereal, almost industrial. As he played, it was like watching some dying animal limp through the forest towards the spot where it will drop. As he came to a close, his voice trailing off painfully, he turned to the camera and thanked the audience. He thanked them for the loyalty, for their time, for the support that they had shown him during his worst moments. He informed the audience that this would be the last time he'd be on YouTube, and wished them all a very happy life. Then he turned his camera off and walked away from life as anyone knew it. He had done it in the bathtub that night. His mother found him with both wrists slit. Though she was horrified, she told someone that he died in the most serene-looking way, stretched out, his face a mask of joy. Whatever he had been thinking about as he ended it all, it had given him such joy that he slipped off with it still in his mind. And so, Jarrett played his final song that night and passed into the annals of history. Well, that's not all he did, Leslie supposed. The death toll swells to 3.5 million as medical services scramble to handle the influx of bodies. His death went mostly unremarked. A small service was held for him, and his body was interred in his hometown. A short squib about him went over social media and on the news circuits. Outside of a handful of fans, though, everyone seemed to be very comfortable to just forget about Jared. His death was sad, of course. The loss of someone so young and so talented is always sad. But people seemed ready to move on and put all this behind them. And they would have, if it hadn't been for Crystal and a voicemail that should have been private. She appeared on Snapchat one night, raccoon-eyed and everything, to tell her fans about a voicemail that had reached her from Jarrett the night that he had done the deed. I was at a charity event when he called, and I completely forgot about it until I saw it tonight in my missed calls. His voicemail lives on as the last words he will ever speak on this earth. He wanted to give me a gift, his last gift, and I think it's only right that I share this last moment with you all. She held the phone up to the microphone, and from it spilled a monotone that no one had ever heard from Jarrett before. Hello, Crystal. I guess you're too busy to talk to me, so just listen. I've written you a song. Remember when I used to do that? It's just for you, so make sure you don't share it with anyone else. Something you can remember me by after I'm gone. She looked at the camera and sniffed a little as she smudged her makeup for effect. I'll be playing that song live tomorrow night on Facebook. I haven't even heard it yet, but I just know that all of you will want to hear Jarrett's last song live at 8 p.m. on my page. True to her word, the very next night, she played the song for everyone to hear. Police are again advising people to stay indoors. Close your windows. Do not open the door unless emergency personnel calls you to do so. There is a fear that others might be weaponizing this phenomenon. The song was nothing like anything he had ever heard before. He had left her 2 messages, it would seem, and the second was a dirge, sung a cappella. It was deep and halting, his voice spilling all the angst and pain that he'd been keeping inside for 3 years. He bled his words for her, and the nearly 20,000 people who watched, and in the end he simply hung up and was ended forever. Crystal cried, of course, and talked about how important he was to her, despite how things had ended. She wished that their relationship could have gone differently, wished they could have spent their lives together, and thanked her fans for experiencing this moment with her. 2 days later, she was dead. Someone has thrown a Molotov cocktail through the door of YouTube's corporate office. The platform claims it is blameless in this, but its failure to act in regards to the video's takedown leads to other questions and thoughts on its negligence. The next 2 days were awash with odd Facebook posts and strange Snapchat stories from Crystal. She claimed there were people in her house. She did a walking tour of her home in which she shouted at things that only she could hear and brandished a knife. She told her fans that she thought Jarrett's ghost was haunting her, trying to get her to kill herself. She had a 2.5-hour video of nothing but her crying on the floor of her closet while she sobbed that people were outside the door, saying that she should drown herself in her pool. It all came to a head on the second day, when she posted her final video. At 11:38 p.m., a staggering and slurring Crystal posted one last video to Snapchat. I found these pills in my medicine cabinet. They helped me a little, but I can still hear the voices. They're telling me how this is my punishment, how I deserve it. And you know what? They're right. I ruined his career. He never hurt me. I just couldn't stand the idea that he would keep living and loving and being loved by people after I left. I'm a heartless bitch, and I deserve this. They found her in her pool the next day. She was the first casualty, but she was not the last. Mass panic in Singapore. People take to the streets looking for loved ones as the death toll. Leslie heard the door to the back room open as Sophia wandered into the living room. She looked very childlike for a girl of 14, and Leslie was glad for her. Let her be innocent a while longer. She would have to grow up soon enough. Sophia lay her head on her mother's lap, watching the TV with a sense of dread as she took in what was going on. She didn't ask about her phone. Leslie had slipped in and taken both her phone and her tablet while she was asleep. She only lay her head against her lap and watched the news talk about the dead in China and the dead in Russia and the dead right there in her own hometown. As they watched, Leslie continued to listen as a story that only she could hear played again and again in her head. He had learned to play guitar at 8 years old. His grandpa had died of cancer. He was a local celebrity by the time he was 12. Crystal had ruined his life. It ran endlessly, on and on and on. She'd been trying to block it out for the better part of 6 hours, but it just kept going, no matter what Leslie did. Someone had posted the video of Crystal's live stream to YouTube shortly before her death. As of this very second, 600 million people had heard what the media was calling Jarrett's dirge, and Leslie was one of those people. Even as the first reports were coming in, she listened to the song via a Facebook link from her sister, Pam. Pam had sent her a text an hour ago, saying her farewells and wishing her luck. The voices had been rising in frequency, increasing in volume with every repetition. As Leslie stroked her daughter's hair, she began to wonder how long she would last. "He learned to play at 8, you know," Sophia said, and the words sent a chill up Leslie's spine. "What?" Leslie asked, looking down at her as she lay watching the steadily increasing death toll. "His grandfather taught him to play guitar at 8 years old. He told him on his deathbed that it was the proudest moment of his life. Mom, I'm scared. How long is this going to last?" Leslie stroked her hand and felt the clammy touch as it slid over her straight hair. She winced as she realized that she had no answer for her daughter. They were two amongst millions, and they would see how long it took before the dirge had them as well. Director Hires stood before the board of the second largest production studio in the United States. There were 7 of them, 4 men and 3 women, and they all looked to be either bored or mildly upset. One of his agents had cost them close to $1 million, but most of them looked like they had nothing worse going on than a mild case of indigestion. In their world, it wasn't about the money. It was about the inconvenience and the disrespect. "The board has come to understand that you finished your investigation," one of them said after a few minutes of weighted silence. "I have," Director Hires stated. "And what have you discovered, Director Hires?" "The FBI does not make a habit of sharing its findings with civilians. We've discovered much, however, and I will be returning to Washington. Consider your soundstage reopened." Some of that indignation turned into actual anger as he turned to go. One of the men, a bald, liver-spotted old specimen, brought his geriatric hand down on the tabletop, and Hires was pretty sure he had done more damage to himself than he had the director's pride. Some of the others were grumbling quietly, not quite capable of outright displeasure. Your investigation, an unwanted investigation, I might add, has cost this studio close to $8 million in lost time, lost revenue, and lost staff. What's more, we've lost a studio audience, several very important actors, and now we will need to make amends to the families of both. We would like to know what you intend to do about that. Do? Hires asked, as he turned back to look at the assembled toads. I intend to do nothing. Our investigation is ongoing, but I am done with your sound studio. You can reopen it. You can burn it to the ground. You can do whatever you like with it. It does not interest me any more. Mr. Hires, one of the other men stated, but Hires cut him off with a sweep of his hand. It's Director Hires. I'm the director of the FBI Special Investigation Unit, and I'm not here to answer your questions. The government does not answer questions. The government solves problems. Unless you would like a little more scrutiny put on your studio, I would suggest that you let me board my plane and go back to the Bureau. I've wasted a lot of time here. Unlike your time, my time is very important to the people of this country. He left them grumbling, some of them outright demanding that he come back and do something. Director Hires did not work for these men. In his opinion, they had rather too high an opinion of themselves. They believed that their wealth and their prestige made them important, made them untouchable. But men like this always had weak points. They indulge in things that would get them sent to prison. They aren't as good with their taxes as they would have you believe. And they may even be laundering money for people worse than they are. If Director Hires wanted to, he could set quite a few dogs sniffing their back trail. But he didn't have time for all that. Right now, people were continuing to die around the world, and he needed to figure out why. Scratch that. He knew why. He just needed to find out how. The CD in his coat pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as he walked out of the business office and stuck out his hand to hail a cab. He should have been back in Washington yesterday, but he had to stick around for this asinine meeting with the board of directors. It was an absolute waste of time. They had expected him to fall to his knees and get on his face and tell them how sorry he was that one of his agents had inconvenienced them and set their work back. Given the evidence that Warwick had collected, it was quite possible that he had saved the studio a lot of time and a lot of money in the long run. If that broadcast had gone off, it was very likely that they would be dealing with 2 such events right now. There was no way of proving that, but Hires felt quite sure that his agent's sacrifice had been to stop what could have been even more catastrophic than Jarrett's dirge. The cab pulled up, and Director Hires climbed into the back as he situated himself. Where to, buddy? Airport, please. You got it. Hey, did you know that Jarrett first played the guitar when he was... Director Hires tuned the man down as they rolled towards LAX. The cabbie would be dead in a couple of days. Once they started sharing facts about the artist, they were usually dead in about 7 days. He needed to get back to Washington. He needed to figure out what the hell was going on. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I know it took a lot of guts to come here, but I want you all to know that you're very brave. The 6 of them were assembled in the conference room at the back of the Marriott. Some of them had come a long way to be there. Some of them hadn't, living within a stone's throw of the little conference room. It really wasn't much, barely big enough to hold most board groups, but attendees had to admit that it was nice to be surrounded by those who truly knew them. They knew the struggle, they knew what they'd been going through, and they knew what they had to do. Why don't you start, Jane? Why don't you tell us what brought you here today? An older woman stood up and waved at the small group. Her eyes looked haunted, and she had a smell on her that made you believe that she was up to 2 or 3 packs a day. The cigarette smoke wafted around her like a cloud, and, like everyone there, You could tell that she was just trying to make it to the next light up. Jane isn't my real name, but it's the only one I'm willing to give. I was once a well-known seamstress in the New York area. If you've ever been to a Broadway show, then you've probably seen some of my work. I did costumes for Cats, Jesus Christ Superstar, Evita, a long list of other shows. I was working backstage one day when I heard the laughter. It wasn't much, just a little bit of laughter. And then I heard someone scream, and I poked my head out of the door to see what was going on. The woman, Margaret Carricore, who was one of the greatest violinists I'd ever worked with, was crab walking across the stage as this shadow, I think, came after her. She looked terrified, but as it reached out and grabbed her face, she began to laugh hysterically. More of them came. They all just sort of appeared, and they clung to her as they pulled her into the floor. Then, the one that had touched her looked at me. It smiled, and I knew it would come for me next. I spent the last 5 years running. I haven't stopped running. Never stayed in one place more than about a week. I do work as a seamstress for small productions now, even doing private work when I can get it. Anything to get me enough gas and enough cigarettes to make it to the next town. I recently learned they were called the gallery or the laughing audience or whatever people call them these days. I hear them laughing sometimes when it's dark or when I'm by myself. I know they're still looking for me, but they just don't seem to have managed to catch up with me yet. They all clapped as Jane sat down, the woman running the meeting turning to the man on her left. Mark, why don't you tell us about your experience next? Mark stood up and waved as he glanced nervously around the room. He was chewing gum, the repetition of his jaw really making it smack, and some of the attendees winced at the sound. He was wearing a suit, an old one that might have looked at home on a banker, but he looked too generic for desk work. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I was supposed to be home by then, but somebody had dropped the ball somewhere, and I had to pick up the money. I worked for some bad people. I was going to pick up some money from one of them, a guy I had only talked with 2 or 3 times. I came into the restaurant, and I heard him arguing with someone. He was telling them to get out. He was telling them to go away, to leave him alone. And I remember wishing that I had a gun, because I thought maybe I'd walked into some underworld shit that I wasn't prepared for. I heard pots and pans being dropped. I heard him screaming at someone to go away and leave him alone. But whoever he was talking to never said a word. Whoever he was talking to just kept coming after him. And as I poked my head into the kitchen, I watched a wave of shadows fall over him and take him somewhere. I ran out right then and there, but it was already too late. They've haunted me for the past 1.5 years, and when I got the email about the support group, I almost ignored it. I don't know how you found me, but I'm kind of glad you did. Just knowing I'm not alone makes me feel safer safer than I have in a long time, at least. More clapping as Mark sat down, but he winced as he looked at the woman leading the group. She covered her face with a hand, burping delicately before bringing it down and giving him a very normal smile. R, would you like to share next? A burly man in overalls crossed his arms over his chest and glowered at her. I would not, thank you very much. The woman smiled broadly, shaking her head at him. Rob, she began, but he blustered over her loud enough to make several people jump. No names. The judge said I didn't have to give you all my name. That was part of the agreement. R, she amended. It's part of the reason we're meeting here. This attendance is court-ordered, and it's the only way you're going to avoid being sent to a psychiatric facility. Come on, R, share with us." The man seemed hesitant, but he uncrossed his arms as he sighed and glowered at the attendees. "My name is R, and I'm here because the court and the fascist Judge Alan Ferguson thinks that I'm crazy. I've been studying shadow people, the things you're referring to as the gallery, for quite some time. I saw them in the early 80s when my daddy was a camera operator for a small TV show that never really took off after the first season. It was one of the earliest events of shadow people taking humans that I'm aware of. My daddy sent me out to get him a drink, and when I came back, I couldn't get onto the sound stage. I looked in the window, having to stand on my tippy toes, and I saw blackness as it took over the whole audience and the stage. I could see the creatures, but I don't think they saw me. I ran all the way home, and when I got there, my mother was so glad to see me that we agreed to never talk about what had happened again. She mourned my father, but I found that I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd witnessed. I began doing research on other events of shadow people and laughing shadows taking individuals and such as that, but I didn't really discover anything until the internet became more widely available. After that, I found other people who had seen the laughing shadows, and we began exchanging information about the possibilities of them abducting people. This was right around the first time my mother tried to have me institutionalized. But after 9 months, I managed to convince them that I was sane. Been trying my best to combat the shadow people for the last 30 years. But they ain't something you can fight, only something you can survive. I had been attempting to shut down the live production of Towesey Review because I had noticed the inclusion of the shadow people and knew they were planning something that would take millions of people through their television sets. After sending several threatening messages, the police arrested me, and the judge told me I could either come to this group or I could be institutionalized for a third time. I agreed to come to this group because it seemed the safest and the quickest way to get back to my work. R looked up when the woman laughed at him, clearly thinking she was mocking him. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, turning to the woman sitting next to him and smiling at her. "Margaret, why don't you tell us about yourself?" The woman looked like a typical frazzled middle-aged woman, and she seemed to be missing the children to put her in such a state. Little did they know that Margaret was lucky to have a place to stay and food to eat, and children were the farthest thing from her mind. No child had ever caused her anxiety, and likely never would. My name is Margaret. I've been having experiences for the past 6 months, though I believe I'm being haunted and not stalked by these shadow people. I moved into an apartment where something very traumatic had happened recently. Someone had died who was very well known and very respected within his community. I don't want to say his name because there's a lot of controversy about what he's done, but I will say that I got the apartment rather cheaply, and that should have been the first indication that something was wrong. I was a psychiatrist before I started seeing them, but now I feel like I might be going crazy. Crazy was never a word I used before the hauntings, but now I've begun to see that it's the most descriptive. I can hear them in my apartment, laughing and chuckling and talking to themselves. Every night they seem to get closer and closer to my bed. I just don't know what to do. When this email arrived, I started to ignore it, but I'm glad I came. Talking with some of you during the initial arrival has helped me see that I'm not alone. And that makes me feel a lot. How did you know what our emails were? R cut in, staring at the woman who was running the meeting. Rob, it's not your turn to speak. Once everyone has had their introduction, we will. I just think it's strange that you knew how to contact each of us. I've never heard of any of these people, and I'm the only one who's chronically online enough for you to have heard about. If the judge hadn't told me I had to go to this, I wouldn't be here either. So how did you know how to get in contact with us? Come on, Rob. Let the lady get done. Let's get through introductions, and then we can... No, Rob said. This don't smell right. I don't know how I didn't see this before. This looks like a trap. Somebody shut down their TV broadcast, and the suicide of that fella, Jarrett, that caused the incident, they're starting to taper off. This seems like tying up loose ends to me. Don't you think it's weird that they've assembled all of us here? How do they know how to contact us? How do they know that if they reached out to us, they'd come? Some of them began to talk amongst themselves, the low rumbling turning decidedly distrustful. You, Rob asked as he pointed at a woman seated closest to the group moderator. What do you do? What's your profession? Well, I was a hairstylist before I started seeing the shadows. I had set up a studio in an old warehouse. I think a photographer used to be in it. And the shadows started... Oh, what about you? What do you do? He asked the man sitting next to her, the only other one who hadn't introduced himself. I'm a choreographer. I'd been working with some individuals who disappeared suddenly after a mysterious gas leak. I went to the location to pick up a few things, and the shadows have been following me ever since. Have any of you told anybody about the shadows? Have any of you talked to anybody about what you seen? They all shook their heads, and Rob turned to face the woman who had brought them all together. If none of you told, then how did she know? There's no way she could have known if none of you talked about what you've seen. That doesn't strike any of you as weird? That doesn't seem odd to anyone except me? All of them turned in unison to look at the orchestrator of this little group, and they found her laughing behind her hands. As her hands came down, they saw the dark ichor pooling around her chin and across her cheeks. It was rushing out of her, falling to the floor and across the front of her top. She was laughing, really losing it now. And as she looked up, they could see her mouth elongating as her skin was overtaken by the black tar that made up the creatures many of them had seen. He's right, because of course he is. I had to have some way to get all of you back where you belong. And I knew most of you had questions and concerns. You were confused. None of you would question a support group. Most of you would just be glad for the camaraderie. Rob was the only one who really was needed. He'd made himself a problem, you see, and we knew that he would be the hardest to lay hands on. So we had to work with a friend in order to bring him this far. We had to bring someone out of retirement who hadn't been in the court since a very particular incident. The judge was more than happy to infect another judge, and then it was just a matter of time. Now I have you all right where I want you. We can tie up all of these loose ends before the show begins. The woman leaned her head back, and the black ooze began to flow out of her like a fountain. It puddled in the room and crawled towards the members of the support group. Rob ran towards the door, but it had been chained from the outside. They pushed and cried and screamed, but no one came to help them. Rob heard as the first two began to laugh. They fell into the dark water and began laughing uncontrollably as it polluted their minds with whatever evil it possessed. It caught another one as they lunged towards the door, and before long it was just Rob and Mark banging on the door as they tried to get someone's attention. It was getting closer and closer, threatening to swallow them up, and as the laughter festered around them, Rob looked at his newfound ally and told him not to let it into his mind. "Don't let it take you. Don't let it corrupt you. It's what they do. They corrupt you with the laughter, and then they..." He stifled a chuckle as the water lapped against his sneakers. They take you when they... Both of them fell down and began to laugh as the influence of the laughing audience swirled around them. It had become too much for either of them, and they fell into the muck and were swallowed by it. Neither of them knew anything but darkness and laughter ever again. The support group orchestrator stood as the dark liquid streamed from her mouth. The gallery would reward her handsomely for all her work. She would have a special place on the stage, and as she sank into the dark water, she was filled with laughter and ecstasy. The show was about to begin. The lights were low, and the audience was in a state of low buzz. Warwick shook himself as he looked around, seeing the people around him in vague hues and unquantified shapes. He turned and looked behind him, and he felt the air catch in his throat. The seats stretched for miles, maybe even farther than the city itself, but he had been given a seat 6 rows from the stage, and at the dead center. It was optimal seating for watching a show, and Warwick could have written a dissertation on its superior placement. From here, he could see every corner of the stage, and he would have a prime position for any scene transitions or shift in background. He felt a tickle at the back of his neck, a feeling like he shouldn't be here, but he couldn't exactly remember why. Because they would all laugh at him. Because the show would be the end of him. Why did he think that, he wondered? He had clearly bought the ticket for the show, and now he was in the audience and ready to see it. The audience. The name sent a shiver up his spine. Why should it elicit such a response? There, at the back of his mind, there was a tickle, something like cat whiskers on a bare arm. But no matter how much he grabbed for it, Warwick just couldn't catch hold of it. It was the kind of thing that should be maddening, but as the lights went down and the band began to warm up, Warwick found his attention drawn to the stage. It was something you might find in an ancient playhouse, something that had survived for years. The curtain was a rich, velvety red. The stage was wood, the planks looking long and splintery as the spotlight caught them. Said spotlights were the can lights you often saw in old theaters, and as they painted the stage in yellow light, it almost made Warwick feel a little nauseous. The curtain bumped every now and then, and it made Warwick think of bugs moving under skin. He was intrigued to find out what might lie behind it, and terrified as well. "Great seats, huh?" someone beside him asked. Warwick turned to agree and found himself face to face with Dr. Foss. "Dr. Foss, what are you doing here?" Warwick didn't know how he knew the man, but suddenly he did. He remembered visiting him at the mental asylum. Did he remember speaking with him about something? Was it shadows? Was it a television show? He couldn't quite remember, but he knew it had been very important. Now the man was suddenly sitting next to him in the theater and looking as sane as anyone. Something was wrong here. Something was off, and Warwick didn't know what to make of it. "Agent Warwick, fancy meeting you here. Yes, I seem to have finally gotten released from that terrible asylum. Are you here for the show? I suppose you must be here for the show." "What show?" Warwick asked. "The only show in town," Dr. Foss told him with a wink. As if his words had summoned it by magic, the curtain went up, and Warwick was presented with a city street that looked straight out of New York. Whoever had designed the set had done an amazing job. They looked so realistic. It was almost as if they had taken concrete and rebar, grime and smog, and the sky itself, and placed it behind that curtain. And now, as people began to move on the sidewalk, it was like the world had come to life before his eyes. Two boys came in from stage left, looking lost and confused, and as they did, all sound stopped. "Where are we?" asked the smallest of them. "I don't know," said the larger of the two. "But we have to—" "I have to," a man in a white coat from stage right. "I have to," a woman with a book under her arm. "I have to," a man with a microphone. "I have to get to the show," sang out a man in a leisure suit. The audience cheered as he came from the crowd, but Warwick was suddenly bombarded with words as the actors on stage sang over each other. "To the sound stage, to the surgery, to the open mic, to my book. I must, I must, I must, I must." The gallery had set up some kind of stage show, but the only real purpose seemed to be a continuation of their campaign of fear and disorientation. All of the actors, people Warwick began to think of as victims, saying their parts on stage as they competed for space in his eardrums. The boys were trying to get to the sound stage so they could shoot a TV show. The doctor wanted to get to the operating theater because he had a very important surgery. The woman wanted, the man in the suit wanted, they all wanted, and it all ran together like shit in a septic tank. Others were coming on stage, people who were speaking their own desires. He heard music, but what had first been beautiful was now discordant, as a second and a third orchestra began to play. One of them was clearly a classically trained orchestra, but one of the others sounded like a middle school band as they tried to find their notes, and a third sounded as if it might have been made up of a street corner collection of people playing cast-off instruments. All the while, there was the flash, flash, flash of someone taking pictures from the first row. There was a madman with a camera who was snapping pictures of the performance, and you could barely hear him as he yelled cheese again and again. Despite all of this, the audience was clapping and laughing. They seemed delighted by the performance, and he saw more than one of them bringing their hands together painfully as whatever force drove them pushed them to enjoy the works on stage. As Warwick watched, the stage was broken into 4 different sections, and then 8, and then as many as a dozen. Each of them had their own background. Each of them had their own story, and they were all being played out at once. The boys that needed to go to the soundstage were putting on some kind of play for a camera and a live audience. As Warwick tried to make sense of it, the oldest of the 2 kids suddenly struck a pose and told those watching that that was going to be a deal breaker for him. The way he hit his mark made Warwick think it might be some kind of catchphrase, and the audience laughed and laughed in response. It was hard to focus on as the doctor performed surgery after surgery on patients who were laid out like crucifixion victims on his operating table. It was hard to focus on as a woman banged away ceaselessly on a typewriter, as a comedian told joke after joke after joke, as a baseball player joined them and began belting out home runs as he belted out his own backstory for them, and on and on and on. As they finished, they would start again, a constantly evolving pantomime that seemed to have no end, like a carousel of endlessly expanding stories. Warwick put his hands over his ears. He couldn't take it. It was too much. If he had to listen any longer, he would go insane. When he began to laugh, it seemed like a mercy. Dr. Foss was already laughing beside him. Whatever lapse in insanity he had had seemed to be gone now. His suit had been replaced with a hospital gown, and he was smacking his hands together with relish as he laughed and laughed and laughed. Some of his fingers looked broken, but he didn't seem to care. The laughter went on around him as well, and Warwick thought he recognized some of the other people in the audience. They were people he had talked to, people he had questioned, witnesses in a case that he would never see the end of. Warwick wanted to give in to the laughter, but he knew he had to fight. The crowd went wild as a man with a guitar came onto the edge of the still intact stage, and Warwick felt his teeth come together. He knew this one. He knew what he had done, and when the woman joined him with a guitar of her own, they sat beside each other as he looked out placidly over the audience. "This one's for you, Gramps," he said, and then he began to play. It was the song, the goddamn song, the dirge, the one that had killed so many, and as it fell over the crowd, they began to laugh even more. Warwick got up and pushed through the crowd around him, heading for the aisle as he ran up an endless corridor between the seats. On stage, all the actors had joined Jared and Crystal for a kind of hellish sing-along, and their voices were like nails across glass. It followed Warwick, threatening to catch him, and the aisle sloped up and down as he ran like some kind of funhouse. The faces of the audience slid by him as they laughed and laughed and laughed. Their skin began to darken, their faces began to ooze, and he saw before his eyes as the gallery converted their human victims into new members of their legion of shadows. Warwick swore as he ran. It wouldn't be him. It couldn't be him. He would escape. He would get out of here, and he would warn everyone about these things and what they were doing. But first, he had to find an exit. First, he had to get out of whatever this was, and he had to. The show went on endlessly behind him, and the sound of it made him want to scream. It was all pushing together. It was all worming its way into his consciousness, like broken stained glass formed into something barely recognizable. The implication would shatter his mind if he stopped to think about it, so he didn't stop. He might have been running for days when he finally found the door, but he was so happy that he didn't even care. He threw the door open, expecting to see a street or a building or something on the other side. What he saw was another show stage, full of laughing people as they watched the same show. He had not even managed to escape from the play going on in front of him and behind him simultaneously. He turned around and could see the seats being filled with those laughing shadows. And when he looked back through the door, he saw the same thing happening like some dark mirror reflected. It was the laughter of the insane. It was the laughter one hears in the depths of hell. And as Warwick fell to his knees and began to rock, he felt the laughter bubble up inside of him as well. He had saved countless people from this fate, but now he would be trapped inside it forever. He'd been so eager to stop the gallery, and now it seemed he would become a part of it. As his own skin began to darken and ooze, his laughter went on, and he barely noticed his own transformation. Agent Warwick had forgotten what many great thinkers had always known, that when you stare into the abyss. You must remember that it stares back. Agent Warwick was going to join that abyss, that laughing, rising, inescapable tide. And he would go there with a smile. The updates from the underground are in. We have rehoused 50% of the inmates that we held there. They're now in E-Dorm and seem to be thriving. The warden looked at his second-in-command as if he hoped there was more to this report than thriving inmates. Also, since we managed to get most of them classified as special needs inmates, the state has given us an increase of about 35% to housing and maintenance. There we go. That will hopefully help us build our new death house, the warden said with a grin. Getting money for a new building was always difficult, but the state had been particularly tight with its purse strings this year. They had told them that the old death house, J-Dorm, was over a sinkhole, and they had to move the inmates for their own safety. The state hadn't liked it, but they had understood. They couldn't keep inmates in unsafe conditions. It was a great way to get hit with fines. What they didn't like was the request for a budgetary increase to purchase a new building to house the death row inmates. They were planning to call it K-Dorm, so as to go with the naming conventions they so often used. The problem seemed to be size. The state wanted to have fewer death row inmates. It was an election year, and they did not want to seem like they were prioritizing a death row facility with voting coming up. The governor only wanted to appear hard on crime after he was in, and he wanted to collect as many sympathetic votes in the interim as he could. That being said, they wanted the new wing to house no more than 5 inmates at a time. The state of Georgia usually had about 5 times that many spread between its facilities. At any given time, Stragview might have as many as 7 or 8 death row inmates all their own. He had argued that this wouldn't work, but the planning board had told him to make it work, or they wouldn't be giving him the money. Did they approve the new additions? Strauss looked at his notes before shaking his head. They did not. Apparently, putting inmates on death row isn't as popular as it used to be. The prison system seems to think there needs to be a more ethical way to kill inmates, or that life in prison would be better, morally speaking, of course. The warden rolled his eyes. Spoken like people who have never lived in a prison. They could spend 1 week here and then tell me it's more ethical to let these people live forever. Most of these people would kill themselves within a week if we gave them the opportunity. This place is awful. It always has been, and it always will be. It's supposed to be terrible. It's a prison, for God's sake. Strauss opened his mouth a couple of times, like he wanted to interject something, but finally just shook his head and went back to the presentation. The bottom line is that they're only going to fund a death row facility that houses no more than 8 people. Also, they will not be reinstating the use of the electric chair. At this point, it's all lethal injection or nothing. And what if an inmate wants to die by the electric chair? Hell, I hear that firing squads have been coming back. If an inmate asks for one of those methods, we're honor-bound to give them their choice, are we not? Strauss looked back at his notes and finally shrugged. By that logic, Warden, we would need a gas chamber and a place for a scaffold. Why not? I think we ought to bring back hanging anyway. It's very visceral, and it sends a message. We'll just table the building of K-Dorm for now. The next thing on the agenda is the approval of the new inmate religion package. The warden put his feet up on his desk and twiddled his thumbs as he looked at the slide with all the proposed religious additions to it. What's wrong with the package we have now? It's always been Christianity, Catholicism, Judaism, and the Muslim faith program. Honestly, I think that's offering them too much. We all know most of them only want to be religious when it comes to a meal plan. This is why you don't get invited to the regional meetings anymore. The additions to the religious program would be pagan in nature, as well as many of the island faiths, like Rastafarianism, and even some of the more esoteric religious practices we have in the United States. So does that mean the state is going to pay to have my chapel expanded, or are we just going to have to find more room?
Sir,
Strauss started to point out, you and I both know that most of the buildings on the grounds have a very fluent kind of geometry. They grow or shrink as they feel like. A cell block that holds 200 people might hold 171 on one day and 230 the next. The admin corridor bends time itself every now and again. Sometimes chow seems to last for hours inside the chow hall, only to have gone on for less than a minute once you step outside. The entire area around Stragview is an anomaly. All of this wheedling for extra funding is unseemly. The warden ignored him as he picked up the handout and read over the extra religions that were being put into the package. He had no problem with people being religious. It was their God-given right, after all, but it was always a lot of hoopla around holidays. A lot of holidays intersected, and it was hard to scratch out enough time for everybody to have a window to pray in. He had thought about just offering no religion a few years ago, but he was told that that was highly illegal, and the state would definitely take notice. The state had been sticking its nose further and further into the business of Stragview for the last 2 years, and the warden had to be very careful how much dust he kicked up. He was still a state-run facility, and that made him indentured to the stuffed shirt number crunchers, the people he hated the most. In fact, one of the new representatives is here to talk to you today. He would like to propose some chapel space, if you wouldn't mind speaking with him. The warden blew out a breath and pushed up from his desk. Oh, sure, because I have nothing but time on my hands these days. The prison basically ran itself after all that business with Miss Evergreen and her ghoul squad. The men had come back to work, he had given them some concessions, and now there was less grumbling than usual. They came in, they did their shift, and they went home so they could come back and do it again the next day. Every now and again, he threw them a pizza party or signed a retention check, but for the most part, it was back to business as it had always been. The warden liked it when things ran efficiently, but he also thrived off a certain amount of chaos. All of these people in the under-prison being sent here created a delicious aura for him to consume as they settled into normal life. But violence had been down, so had the general feeling of unease that surrounded the place. It was time to shake things up a little bit, but the warden really wasn't sure how. He's waiting for you in the lower towers. I told him I would show him up when I was done with my quarterly presentation. Is he there by himself? The warden asked as he lifted an eyebrow. No one was supposed to be unsupervised on the compound. No one except staff and those who were trusted. The warden had been very hesitant about extending passes to anyone after the Miss Evergreen incident. Everyone was vetted to the nines, and everyone had their loyalty tested extensively before they were left without an escort. The prison was his, by God, and it would stay that way from now on. No, of course not. I left Sergeant Grayson with him. The warden blew out a sigh of relief. Good thinking. Send him in. Strauss left as he collected up his charts and his whiteboard, and it gave the warden enough time to prepare a sense of mystique before his guest arrived. Some of that glamour was taken from him when he felt the pressure that was coming up the stairs. It made him want to squint. It made his skin burn a little bit, and he realized that whatever this was, it was unlikely to be someone looking to start up a church group or some kind of outreach program. The door opened as the sergeant came in, and he didn't have to look at the man very hard to see that something had passed between him and the visitor while they were waiting outside. Sergeant Grayson looked as though he had had epiphany on the mountain, and the warden suspected that there might be a resignation letter in his box by the end of the day. He hoped not. Grayson was a good sergeant, and the loss of such a man was always a blow to the institution. Then, the man himself came in, and the warden suddenly realized he was dealing with something a little worse than a missionary. The man looked like a farmer. He had a wide-brimmed hat and a checkered blue and white shirt that looked like it might be homemade. He wore overalls, and his brown work boots looked like the heels had been nearly worn flat. He had his hands stuffed into his pockets, good, deep working man's pockets, and he smiled at the warden as he came in, showing him a mouthful of sterling white teeth. It was the feeling coming off the man that the warden did not like. It was a feeling that made him feel like he might have spent a little bit too much time at the beach, or he might have sat too close to a heat lamp, or he might have spent too much time around the wrong kind of holy man. "The Warden of Stagview, this is a delight. I've been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time." He put a hand out for the warden to shake, but the warden didn't move from his desk in the slightest. After a count of 5, the man retracted his hand, but the smile stayed in place. "I had come by to discuss a program with your prison. I would be very interested in bringing the word of God to your inmates." "You must be the bastard who hurt my brother. I think that much is obvious, which raises the question why you would think it was a good idea to come and meet with me inside my stronghold." The man continued to keep his hand in his pocket and appraised the warden critically before pulling one of them out an inch or two to reveal that his big-knuckled hands held a small black book. "For starters, because if you decide to do harm, I'll just open this book, and without my hand to close it, I don't think you'll find this room very livable for much longer. If you even make it out, I'd be surprised. Either way, it's a lot of mess for nothing. I don't mean you any harm. I have no real interest in your prison, except as a place to change minds. You are in the mind-changing business, aren't you?" "That's what they tell me," the warden said, preparing to lunge at the man if he took the book any further out of his pocket. "The other reason I'm here is that you have a problem. A problem I can help you with." "A problem? What sort of problem would that be? I'm assuming you think that your God can make my inmates act right. Because I have to tell you, the other ones we give them access to aren't really doing anything great." The man's smile got a little wider, and it actually looked like it might be real this time. Whoever this man was, he was good at talking, and he was used to getting his way. "You have picked up a problem somewhere in your stronghold. Somebody brought in a little bug that just refuses to leave. Isn't that the case?" "I don't have the slightest idea what you could be talking about," the warden said. "Don't you? Well, I guess them hostile shadows that keep leaving out of your death row facility were just a rumor. They do like to leak, don't they? They leak, and before long, all your inmates are smiling for all the wrong reasons." The warden sat a little straighter as he glowered at the man. "And how would you know about that?" "Oh, the Bright keeps track of the laughing shadows fairly well. They are a particular nuisance, a nuisance that we've dealt with before. The last time we dealt with the shadows, it cost us a lot. We've only just managed to rebuild to a level where we could combat them again. I don't know if you've heard, but they recently caused a lot of mess around this country. Maybe your town doesn't get the right kind of news programs, but I would suspect that some of your citizens probably lost people they loved, but maybe can't remember so well." I'm a busy man, the warden spat. If you have a point, get to it. It's very simple. I'm just suggesting a little trade. You let us in and talk to some of your inmates, and in exchange, we take care of your laughing shadows. Seems like a good enough trade. You get what you want, and we get what we want. If we can turn a few of your inmates, then they won't be your problem anymore. If you get rid of the shadows, then they also won't be your problem anymore either. Seems to me like you're the one who benefits, not us. Why don't you let us be good neighbors and help you? But that's not all you want, is it? The warden asked. If all you wanted to do was help, you would have gone to my sister. Oh, we know about your sister. The problem is she rarely leaves town, and she's a hard one to get in touch with. We also know how much she loves this town, but we also know that her older brother is a bit of an opportunist. We suspect that if it comes down to you or the town, it'll always be you. You're a survivor, always have been, and we feel that it might be in your best interest to show us the way in. You think about it. You fix your problem, and then you fix our problem. Seems like a pretty good trade, don't it? It didn't seem like a bad trade, except for the part where he betrayed both of his siblings and a town that had never really done anything to him. The warden was an opportunist, but he also didn't want to take on unreasonable risks. Today, I'm going to allow you to leave so that I can think this over. If at some point in the future I decide that it's in my best interest, I might contact you again. Until I do, I don't want to hear or see you anywhere near my prison. Is that understood? The man took his hand out of his pocket and hooked it into his belt. Crystal clear. We look forward to hearing from you, Warden. Then he left, and the Warden of Stragview was left with a lot of things to think about. A lot of things to think about, and a lot of decisions that would need to be made. He would definitely be burning some bridges this time. It would just depend on the direction that they were burning, he supposed. Hi! My sword swept up to meet his, and the ring of steel was high and sweet. Low! His blade swung low, and I slid mine down to catch it. High, low, high. Up, down, and then up again, my sword finding the rhythm easily. Low, low, mid. I hit 2 downswings and followed it with a parry before he could stab me in the guts. We had been going at it like this for nearly an hour, and super fairy summer night strength aside, I was starting to get winded. My arms burned from the effort of swinging my heavy sword, and my sweat pooling in my armor was beginning to get uncomfortable. It wasn't terribly humid for a spring day, but being sweaty and plate mail is never a lot of fun. When he slid the sword into its sheath on his back, I breathed an audible sigh of relief. You've improved greatly, my boy, but you still have a long way to go before you're ready for a fairy coup or an attack by frost giants or some such thing. I gave him a bow, which he returned, and the two of us decided to head out for the showers. I've been training with Mr. Vanderhorn for the better part of 2 months, and I'd definitely seen an improvement. At the start, my arms had shaken after 10 to 20 minutes of constant swinging, let alone combat. Now, I could fight for almost an hour, as long as it wasn't too strenuous. I felt more comfortable in my armor, and I felt as if I might be able to stand against the threat that came against my lady now. All in all, I was in the best shape of my life, and despite my complaints, I was glad that Mr. Vanderhorn had made such a big deal about cardio and running. I was lean and combat ready. but I still had a long way to go. Mr. Vanderhorn had started with morning and evening exercise. We would warm up, do some stretches and light aerobic exercises that would look right at home in any middle or high school gym. At first, he had told me not to wear my armor because the chances of getting cut were very slim. "We won't be fighting with that," he said when I'd shown up with my sword. "Wouldn't be fair, and I want you to get used to swinging something that you're not likely to hurt yourself with. Starting off, we'll be using these." He'd thrown me a plastic sword that was as close to the weight of my actual broadsword as I'd ever felt. The edge was dull, but that hadn't stopped him from swinging it at me like he intended to beat me to death. My first couple of weeks had been filled with bruises and sore limbs as I tried to match his strength and speed. Mr. Vanderhorn did not believe in taking it easy on his pupils, and I had to do my rounds more than once with ace bandages around my ankles after some pretty nasty hits. "Your opponent isn't going to pull his punches. The only thing your opponent is going to be worried about punching is your ticket, boy. Don't get used to anyone holding back. And in combat, the strongest warrior wins, and the second-place runner-up is usually pushed into a shallow grave as his mantle travels to the next worthy vessel." That was only part of his training. Mr. Vanderhorn likes to hold sudden and very surprising rounds of training. He would catch me in places without guests, places that visitors were unlikely to see us, and he would randomly attack me. At first, he had used a wooden training sword against my broadsword. I went armed, no matter where I was, but the first time he had brought that wooden sword crashing down against my shoulder, I had thought I might pass out. If it hadn't been for my Fey armor, as well as the slight dip that I had made when I finally noticed him barreling towards me, he would have probably dislocated my shoulder. We'd had a short but ferocious back and forth, which had ended with me on my back as he put the wooden tip of the sword against my throat. "A summer knight should always be prepared for battle, period. The forces of winter do not care what time of day it is. Early morning, late afternoon, even dead of night, they will attack you viciously, and if they find you wanting, you will be dead. I've seen several knights into the ground already, and I do not want to see you go before your time." After that, I moved around in a constant state of awareness. It led to some close calls. I nearly cut some of my friends in half, and the barker had to duck a particularly nasty swipe when he surprised me outside the greenhouse. But the next time that wooden sword came swinging towards me, I was ready. Eventually, he said we were done with the wooden swords, and it was metal on metal after that. I'd never been in bad shape, but training against Mr. Vanderhorn made me realize that I'd gotten very relaxed in my training schedule. I had never really been trained with a sword, believe it or not. Swordplay was not something my parents thought I needed to study as an after-school activity. He taught me form, he taught me how to measure my strikes so that I wouldn't waste any energy, and above all, he taught me strategy. "Oftentimes, boy, the greatest weapon is the one inside your mind." Aside from swordplay, Mr. Vanderhorn also taught me battlefield strategy. He'd been leading the summer court into combat before I'd even been born, and his grasp of tactics and mixed units combat would have made MacArthur jealous. He had an expert eye for where things should be so that they could be best utilized. And after a while, he managed to convey some of that to me. "The summer court has not advanced its fighting tactics since the Bronze Age. When engaged in combat, they still use archers, they still use cavalry, they still use footmen to do most of their dirty work. There's no need to learn how planes operate in a combat situation, or tanks or guns or other modern things that the military takes for granted. As far as the summer court is concerned, it's still the Middle Ages, and a cavalry charge is just as effective now as it was in the time of Henry VIII. As impressive as he was at swordsmanship, he was equally as impressive in a court setting. The lady had been sending him with me whenever I had to fulfill my court duties, and he was as adept at heraldry as he was at gossip. All of them knew him. He was as well known in the court as any of the royalty, and even those he claimed did not like him were careful not to be discourteous to him. "That one there, the one with the weasel's eyes and the wispy chin beard, is Baron Stephen McAllister. God only knows what he's the Baron of, but he does paltry things for Queen Titania, so his presence is endured. That over there is Lady Brandybuck. She's been a lady of the court since Christ was a kitten, and she's well liked by the Queen. If she asks you to dance, for God's sakes, dance with her. Just watch your feet. She's got 3 left feet, and not a one of them can keep a rhythm. That over there is Lord and Lady Waverley, 2 of the lady's retainers from the Wizard Council." "The wizards have a council?" I had asked, not quite sure what else to say. "My boy, these days everyone has a council or a guild or some damn thing. When you're dealing with the Fae, it's best to remember that there's safety in numbers. Not everyone has a mantle to hide under or powerful friends within the Fae court. Some of them have to get by off charisma or a collection of power that would make them unruly if they chose to be. Fortunately, the Waverleys are only here to inform the council about the comings and goings of the summer court." "Do they have counterparts in the winter court?" I asked as I took a drink from a nearby tray. Vanderhorn laughed as he grabbed one up for himself, making the glasses shiver a little as he bumped them delicately. "Son, no one much trucks with the winter court, if they can help it. Most of the wizards who do business with them are a little seedier than the Waverleys. I'm sure that Queen Mab has her loyal retinue, but most of the creatures and people who serve her have a wintry look about them." I didn't have to ask what he meant by that. I dealt with enough of the winter court to know that many of them had a lean and hungry disposition. Their eyes moved around a little too quickly, and they speculated a bit too much without saying a word. Their hands hovered a little too close to weapons, and many of them had a blunt and not altogether pleasant way about them. That wasn't to say they couldn't be charming. That was not to say they could not be funny or endearing, but many of them seemed to be trying to decide where to put the knife or when to call in their blackmail. The summer court wasn't much better. Most of them would smile to your face while they stabbed you in the back, but the longer I spent in the company of the Fae folk, the more I got used to it. I had enjoyed my time with Mr. Vanderhorn, but I was always very careful to keep my eyes peeled as well. Mr. Vanderhorn, though very human from what I had been told, was also of the Fae world. If he were here to report on us to Queen Titania, then I would need to impress him and also be very careful what I told him. If his reports made the Queen of Earth and Life decide we were not worth the effort, then Vanderhorn would likely be the one to swing the sword. He was warm and likable, but he could just as easily be my death. "How much longer do I need to train before I'm as good as you?" I asked him as we headed for the greenhouse to get cleaned up. Aurelius Vanderhorn laughed, and it sounded deep and genuine as it shook his body. "Boy, you could train until you're as old as I am, and I'm not sure you would ever be that good. I've been conditioned and forged in the fires of battle since I was 13 years old. I've been in combat since the time you were ready to start high school. War and bloodshed and swordplay are as integral to my life as breathing. You're good. You show great promise, but do not strive to be as good as me. I'll tell you, if I had to do it again, I would honestly wish to be a little less formidable than I am." "Why? Surely in our line of work it's better to be formidable. How else would you have survived in the winter court this long if your sword arm was not deadly?" He got a very far-away look, a look that told me he was thinking about times that had gone by, and he seemed to hunch a little more, as if looking for his cane. "Son, in a lot of ways I'm envious of you. You had a life before the summer court. You had friends, a family, a chance to do something other than be a weapon for a fairy queen. The last time I saw my mother, she was handing me to a member of the order before taking her payment and leaving. I was nothing to her but an extra mouth to feed, and she was honestly not at all sad to be rid of the burden. You have people who love you, people who respect you, but you also have a connection to the world that I've never had. Be happy for that, and enjoy it while it lasts." He excused himself when we got to the greenhouse, and I was left to think about that last comment before going to shower off and find some clean clothes. Perhaps it wasn't as great to be Aurelius Vanderhorn as I had thought. We were at our late afternoon practice when someone from the court arrived. It was a tall, slender fae, dressed in a forest green cloak, who moved with a sort of purpose you don't often see in regular people. She had a sword on her hip, a thin little rapier that looked fragile, but was likely just as durable as my broadsword. That was something I'd had to get used to the longer I stayed in the summer court. Not everything was how it seemed, and most things were a little more than glamour. As she approached the two of us and bowed, a curtsy was returned, and she took a scroll from inside her cloak. "Queen Titania, Lady of Summer, Queen of Light and Life, has asked the two of you to represent her in a matter of court business." Aurelius took the scroll and unrolled it, reading over the missive before tucking it into his waistband and nodding. "Tell the Queen that we would be honored to meet with the representatives of the Moon Elves on her behalf." The messenger nodded and threw an odd little salute. "Then you shall be looked for 2 nights hence at the Moon Elf camp at the location provided. The Queen thanks you for your service." As the messenger left, Aurelius turned to me and grinned. "Well, boy, it appears we have business to attend to." He started walking off towards the greenhouse, and I had to run to keep up with him. There was a spring in his step that I hadn't noticed before. Apparently, the thought of court business filled him with glee, and I wondered exactly what would be expected of us. "What sort of business are we to attend to?" "Let's wait until we see the lady. She's going to want to hear about this. If the two of us are going to be gone for an evening, then she's going to need a new security detail." So, the two of us headed towards the greenhouse and found her bent over a trough of dirt as she and Tobias worked with a few new samples. Summer was fast approaching, and we had all been racking our brains as we tried to find something to showcase for the town. Finally, the lady had decided on a collection of flowers from different regions, all of them in close proximity, to show off the beauty of nature, regardless of region or distance. It was quite an undertaking, especially considering that a lot of the plants had different soil and sun requirements. But, when you're the summer lady, such things are of trifling concern. She looked up as we came in, Tobias nodding as he gave me a scowl, and Aurelius gave her the scroll before telling her that a messenger had been to see the two of us. The lady read it over, and her eyes moved quickly over the thick parchment scroll before she nodded and handed it back to him. "Sounds as if the Queen is after oaths of fealty. Have you been to see the Moon Elves before, Mr. Vanderhorn?" "Not for quite some time, my lady. I don't believe I've ever met with the ones in this region, but I know the ones up north are fond of displays of strength, and many of them like to hunt. I assume the ones down here aren't too different." The lady smiled. "Something like that. Sam, you will of course accompany him. Viewing such matters is always part of your training." "I had thought I might," I told her. "It'll be good to see the Moon Elves again. I haven't seen some of them since they helped us in our fight against the Green Man." Mr. Vanderhorn brought his hands together. "Then it's settled. The two of us will head out tomorrow around sunset. I trust that your security detail will be adequate to protect you while we're gone. I'm sure that Randy can bolster the guard a little bit so that the two of you aren't missed. I'm not going to tell you not to enjoy yourselves, but do be quick." The two of us exited the greenhouse, Mr. Vanderhorn already beginning to make plans. "I'll wear my armor tomorrow night, just as you will. We must make sure that we're both courtly and on our guard. You never know what you'll be walking into when you go to find oaths of fealty." "Those are like proclamations of trust, right?" I asked him. "They're a little bit more than that, boy. An oath of fealty is something you give to a lord so that he knows he can depend on you in times of trouble. Queen Titania has many such vassals. You've even met a few of them. Those are the people who will come to her aid when she needs them, and many of them would do so simply for the honor of having a favor owed from the Queen of Light and Life. Titania is quite the prolific figure, and it is an honor to be in her service." A thought suddenly occurred to me, but I was a little bit afraid of looking naive. What happens if one of their vassals does not swear the oath? Mr. Vanderhorn gave me a not-so-subtle side-eye. "Then it would be taken very badly. People have gone to war over such things. As much of an honor as it is to be on the side of the Queen of Summer, it is a terrible thing to be her enemy." "Like the Winter Court," I said, with a kind of unearned assurance. "Not quite the same thing. Queen Mab and Queen Titania are not enemies as such. They are two sides of the same coin. They may dislike each other, but one cannot exist without the other. They are a very fragile dance between elements and seasons, and as much as they annoy each other, they are very aware that there cannot be a winner in that exchange. To do so would be to upset the natural order, and probably themselves and humanity as well." I didn't say anything for a minute, not really sure what to make of that, and when he clapped me on the shoulder, I nearly fell on my face. "Don't worry too hard about it. You're still new to this, and there's a lot of nuance that you don't quite understand yet. That's why I'm here. I am a teacher of summer nights, and I'll make a champion out of you yet." The next day was more training and business as usual. We trained, we went about park duties, we trained some more, and we lent our power to the lady when the need arose. But as the sun began to set, I threw my green stole over my armor and went to meet with Mr. Vanderhorn. He was wearing a very similar suit of green armor, his walking stick replaced with a long wooden staff. It was the kind of fighting stick you expected to see in Sherwood Forest, and by the way he held it, I could tell it was probably as hard as iron. He had cut his hair into a short warrior's cut, and his little gold glasses were perched on his nose, as they always were. He had discarded the crippled old man act, and now he stood straighter and looked more menacing than I'd ever seen him before. Until, that is, he turned and saw me, and his face split into a wide, grandfatherly smile. "Well, don't you look fit for a masquerade ball? The ladies in the camp are going to love you. Come, we don't want to be late. I'm sure they're expecting us, so they've probably set out a feast or some such." We started walking up the road, and once we'd gone a couple of miles, Aurelius turned us into the forest, and we started making our way through the trees. Once upon a time, a 3-mile walk would have left me winded, but these days it felt like nothing at all. Not only because I had the summer mantle at my disposal, but I also had gotten in pretty good shape working out with Mr. Vanderhorn. All that swordplay and training had made me lean and formidable, and a little hike through the woods was nothing. "So, how does this work?" I asked, after we'd been tromping through the woods in silence for a while. "How does what work?" he asked, as he used his staff to move a branch out of the way. "This thing we're going to do, what exactly does it entail?" "Mostly, we go to a feast, we talk to people, we drink their wine and eat their food, we dance with some pretty girls, and then at the end, I turn to their queen and ask them if they will swear loyalty to the queen in court. They say yes, we leave and take our news to the queen." We walked a little farther before something occurred to me. What if they don't? What if they don't what? What if they don't swear loyalty? What if they tell us to kick rocks? Mr. Vanderhorn got very quiet, and my only company was the clump of his staff for a little while.
Sam, do you know what the job of the summer night is?
It's to defend the court, to defend the queen, to defend her vassals, and to defend those in need.
That's the size of it, but there are other duties as well. You have to lead her armies into battle. You have to be her negotiator in things that require such action. Sometimes you have to be her spy in hostile territory, and sometimes you have to act as her executioner.
I stood for a moment, and it took about 7 or 8 steps for the old man to realize I wasn't following him anymore. So wait, if this Moon Elf Queen doesn't want to be allied with Queen Titania,
then the Queen will likely take it as a grave insult, and it will be our job to exact retribution upon them,
he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. He started walking again, and I ran to catch up with him after letting that sink in. Mr. Vanderhorn, I know some of these Moon Elves. I fought beside them. Some of them are my friends. I don't think I can put them to death simply because they don't want to be allied with the Queen. Aurelius Vanderhorn stopped, and his stare was absolutely icy.
Well, you better get over that pretty quick. You are an extension of the Queen's power. If she commands something of you and you don't do it, she will compel you to do it.
That sent a shiver through me. What does that mean? I asked, aware that my voice was getting a little high.
Have you ever heard someone say they just saw red and then did something god-awful that they can't remember? Being compelled is like that, son. If you won't move the way she tells you to, then she will take control of you and make you her instrument. It's dreadful. She's only had to do it to me a few times to convince me that it isn't something I want done again.
We walked in silence as I thought about that, and when he put a hand on my shoulder, I almost jumped.
Don't think too hard about it, kid. These elves have been our allies for generations. The idea that they won't want to play nice is almost unheard of. We're going to a banquet. We will eat, drink, we'll do a little dancing, and then we will accept their promise of loyalty. Simple as that.
I wondered about that as we went through the woods, but after a few minutes, I had something new to worry about. We'd been walking for nearly an hour when I began to feel like I was being watched. I would catch odd rustles in the woods, the odd little sounds from behind or before us. But if my mentor heard these things, he never made mention of it. He walked along like a man doing nothing more strenuous than having an afternoon stroll, and when he caught me glancing at him, he put a finger to his lips and shook his head. A few minutes later, we came into a clearing and found ourselves standing before 5 armed elves, one of whom I thought I knew.
Glimmer?
I asked, but Aurelius put a hand out to stop me from stepping forward. You have entered Moon Elf territory, stranger, said one of the elves beside her. I looked at her, my eyes asking her why they were doing this, but she only winked and shook her head.
I am Aurelius Vanderhorn, an emissary of Queen Titania. This is the Summer Knight, her emissary in this matter. We have come at the behest of our queen to meet with your queen. Do you offer us safe passage?
The elves didn't bother looking around. The speaker merely smiled and nodded. Safe passage is granted. Be welcome, friends. The gathering broke apart then, as the elves came to greet us properly. The elf I had mistaken for my friend Glimmer was actually her sister, Nassal. The resemblance was uncanny, but she told me that Glimmer was off handling other business these days, and her group had been sent to meet us. We've been out here since before sunset, not wanting to miss the emissaries of summer. They escorted us to a large cave in the ground, a cave that suddenly rose from the forest floor, and it turned out to be a whole village of moon elves. I stood at the cusp and looked at it, feeling awestruck in a way I rarely ever was. Some of them had made small houses on the cave floor. They even had a marketplace set up to do business there, but I could see the walls were clustered with dwellings driven into the stone itself. Our escort led us through the town, picking up hangers-on and guards as they asked what was going on and who the strangers were. All of them looked delighted when my mentor was named, and they began following along gladly as if we were suddenly part of a parade. We arrived at the grandest stone castle I had ever seen, a catacomb built into the side of the earth itself, and that's where I met the Queen of the Moon Elves and many of her counselors. She wore a long gown that almost looked to be made of cave moss, and when she spoke, it sounded like the laughter of angels to my untrained ear. "We welcome the delegation from the summer court. We would invite you in for a meal, if you would do us the honor."
"We would," Mr. Vanderhorn said, and a cheer went up from those around.
We were seated at a long table inside the castle, and served from crystalline plates as musicians played, and some of the Moon Elves sang. Mr. Vanderhorn and I were given a place of honor beside the Queen and her consort, and all of them wanted to know summer gossip and stories of his bravery. Several of them wanted to know the story of how I had defeated the Green Man as well, and I had to tell them that he had not been defeated, only set aside. Many of them shook their heads as if it meant the same thing, and we drank and ate and danced a little as the night went on. Moon Elf wine is quite strong, and I had to remind myself to drink water as well, so that I didn't make a fool of myself. The summer mantle protected me a little bit, but strong spirits would still be the undoing of me. I had just finished dancing with an elf who had daisies woven into her hair, when Nasal appeared and took my hand as she pulled me into another dance. She smiled as we spun together, her teeth very bright in the low light, and I began to get a little dizzy. "We're honored to host you, Summer Night. I trust this is a social call and not anything too serious." I started to speak, burping into my hand as I tried to keep what I'd eaten down, before saying, "Nothing too strenuous. We're honored to be here." "We met before, you know," she said as we danced. "I came to the defense of your garden. You were not the Summer Knight then, but I was impressed by how you handled yourself in battle. I trust your skills have increased since then." "Very much so," I said, as I eased into the movements and my dizziness subsided. "Mr. Vanderhorn has helped me improve my skills. I was surprised that Queen Titania sent her knight and her judicator together. That's a lot of power for a visit." I must have looked confused, because Nasal laughed as we swung wide and then came back together. "Did you not know? Aurelius Vanderhorn, the Knight of the Green Field, has been Titania's judicator and executioner for centuries. He trains the knights, he leads her personal guard, and he dispenses justice as his queen sees fit. I do hope you pass his test, Sir Knight. You're too handsome to end up on the wrong end of his sword." I started to ask her more, but we parted ways then as the music stopped, and all were called back to table to enjoy a dessert. "Enjoy yourself?" Mr. Vanderhorn asked, as I regained my seat, and I nodded rather than try to voice anything. As the plates were moved and the dessert came out, Mr. Vanderhorn stood suddenly, and the Queen stood along with him as if the two had practiced such a motion. "Queen Amatray, I have been sent here by the Lady of Life and Light to take your oath of fealty. Do you swear loyalty to the Summer Court and pledge to aid it if war or unrest should come?" I felt a jolt go through me. Now would be the time that would prove all. Would they swear the oath, or would they call themselves traitors? I didn't want to have to kill anyone today, but Mr. Vanderhorn had made it sound like if her oath was not given properly, then I would have absolutely no choice in the matter. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth, and I paused on a knife's edge as I waited for which direction I would fall. "I do," the Queen said, and a cheer went up from the crowd. "Do you swear to keep her counsel, to bedevil her enemies, and to serve her as you have served her in the past?" "I do." "Thank you," Mr. Vanderhorn said with a bow, and I got the feeling that he meant it. "I will take this news to my queen, and I know it will bring her joy." The party petered out not long after that. We ate some dessert, we said our goodbyes, and we were taken to the edge of the forest where the road met the trees. Our escort told us goodbye, Nasal telling me she hoped she would see me again soon. But as we were walking up the road, I had one last question for Mr. Vanderhorn. So, if they had told us that they would not swear the oath, what would have happened? He looked at me with eyes full of pity and understanding. Then we would have slaughtered all of them to a man, every woman, and every child. We do not do this out of malice, boy. We do this out of duty. It is to our queen that we are loyal, and it is to our queen that we do not question. He didn't sound happy about it. His voice sounded haunted and far away, but he sounded as if he would do it, regardless. I took that with me for the rest of the night, and it would keep me company well into the late hours of the morning, as I asked myself once again what exactly I had signed up for. The only company I had in the hospital was the beeping of the machines. I felt so lonely, sitting in the ER as Grandpa lay in the bed beside me and fought for his life. No more than a few hours ago, we had all been sitting on the back porch, going about our lives as usual, and now it felt like everything had suddenly changed. I had called John and told him what was going on, and he had called some of his friends at the hospital and told them to expect us. John lamented that he couldn't be there, but he had nearly been too drunk to make it home, and he was afraid that if he tried to drive up there, he'd get in an accident. Keep me posted the second you know anything. I want to come visit him, and I want to be there for you. You're my friend, and that's not something that I take lightly, he had said. I appreciated him for that, more than he would ever know. I'd sent Glimmer a text, but Glimmer was always on the move, and who knew when she would get it. She kept the little cell phone charged from the portable batteries that I gave her on her nightly visits, but sometimes she would be away doing things for her tribe, and it would be dead for a couple of days before she made it back to the house. I couldn't be angry about it. She had other responsibilities besides drinking on my back porch with me and my grandpa. But I still missed her when she wasn't around. I'd come to wonder if that's what life would be like once we were married. Me sitting at home wondering when I would see her while she hunted and supported the tribe. Would I move into the cave with the moon elves? Would she move to Grandpa's house to me? If we had children, what would that situation look like? Would they spend their time with her and then come back to see me after dark? I didn't know, and not knowing was harder than answering the questions. I sat with my phone on my knee and just thought about what I should do next and what my options were here. Grandpa had spent about 2 hours in the emergency room before they admitted him. I'd answered about 1,000 questions before his doctor arrived and told me he was going to go up to the ICU. That's when he told me about the condition that Grandpa had been keeping a secret for the last few months. He'd seemed so surprised that I didn't know. He knew that Grandpa wasn't letting me into his doctor's appointments anymore, and he knew that he'd been keeping his diagnosis very hush-hush, but I don't think he suspected that it was a secret even from me. We talked about telling his family, about telling his friends, but you've been his caregiver for nearly half a decade. I assumed you already knew. Why wouldn't I? You take care of him, and he depends on you. I'm not sure why he decided to leave you in the dark, but it seems counterproductive to his treatment. I didn't have an answer for that, and it was then that I planted myself in one of the hospital chairs and just started thinking. I could understand why he didn't want to tell my mom. My mother was a harridan, and I think he knew she would ultimately blame me for his condition. I could have no more given him cancer than I could have cured him, but my mother had always seen me as something of a family disappointment. That's why they had sent me to live with Grandpa in the first place. They'd been tired of me wasting my life playing video games and going to school when I felt like it. They'd grown tired of caring for me and decided that if my grandpa was also going to be irresponsible, then maybe we could take care of each other. It had worked out splendidly, the two of us teaching each other and taking care of each other, but no matter what the doctor told her, she would ultimately say that his decline was my fault. My uncle wouldn't blame me, but he wouldn't be able to do anything helpful either. He had his own life, he had a career, and he wasn't going to be able to fix Grandpa, so he would just wait around for the inevitable. None of them knew what Grandpa did. None of them knew about the life he lived. None of them would have believed me if I told them. My uncle and my aunt and my mother were all firmly positioned in the real world, and none of them had any time for magic or fantasy, which was Grandpa's bread and butter. I didn't even know what would happen if Grandpa died. We had never really talked about the will, or about what would happen to his house or his things. I assumed they would go to my mother and his other children, but Grandpa had hinted many times that he wanted to leave certain things to me. He knew that anything he left my mom would be sold, and anything he left my uncle or my aunt would sit in a corner and collect dust. My uncle had his own problems, and my mother had debts that she would want to pay with Grandpa's antiques and his eccentric novelties. In the end, I could be out of a home and in need of somewhere else to stay in very short order. I looked at the old man as he lay in his bed, one machine breathing for him as another machine beeped his life away. I sure do wish you were here to tell me a story about how this was absolutely normal and how everything was going to be okay. Seemed like Grandpa always had a story about how whatever was going on was nothing when it was compared to something he had done. Nothing could beat a Grandpa story for making everything seem nice and normal and manageable. That had always been Grandpa's superpower. He could put you at ease with a well-timed story and a bottle of beer and a little time spent on the back porch as nature happened around you. I swiped a hand across my face and realized I was crying. I wasn't ready to lose Grandpa, but I didn't want to see him exist like this. Grandpa would have considered this some kind of hell, and I didn't know what to do to get him out of here. Marcus? I looked up at the sound of my name and saw Dr. Winters standing in the doorway to Grandpa's ICU room. She was wearing a white coat that I'd never seen before and carrying a chart. She looked like any of the doctors here, and I suppose that was by design, if she was trying to blend in. Dr. Winters, I said, as I wiped my face and tried not to let her see me cry. What are you doing here? I didn't know you did rounds at the hospital. She smiled and had the good grace to pretend that she hadn't seen my sorrow. I do psychiatric consults every now and again. The clinic, I know, seems a little gimmicky, but I really do have a degree in psychiatric medicine. You'd be surprised how easy it is to get a doctorate when you have access to the wealth of knowledge humanity has accumulated over the years. I actually finished my doctorate in 1.5 years, and it's probably the only reason I haven't been shut down for what I do. I saw your grandfather's name on the hospital roster and decided that I'd come up and see if he was okay. One look at him had her shaking her head, and I saw her wipe at her own eyes before she said, I'm sorry. Of course, he isn't okay. They don't put people in the ICU for no reason. Marcus, I wish there was something I could do, but oncology isn't really my strong suit. I nodded, but then I looked at her as if she had let slip something that maybe she shouldn't have. Wait, how do you know he has cancer? He came to me about a month ago, she said with a sigh. He made me promise that I wouldn't talk to you. I begged him to tell you. It wasn't fair. You were taking care of him and you didn't know, but he said he didn't want you to worry, and I promised I would keep his secret. I thought about that for a moment. It was so very Grandpa to go confide to someone he had considered to be an enemy not long ago, rather than burden someone he cared about. I wanted to be mad, but it was hard while he was laying here in bed. What was done, and getting upset about it wouldn't help matters any. I don't know if he's going to make it out of this one. He's tough, but I don't know anybody that's tougher than cancer. Don't give up on him just yet. Your grandfather's got a lot of fight left in him, and if anybody can come back from something like this, then it's probably him. We talked a little longer, just sort of chit-chatting as she kept me company, but eventually she said she needed to get back home, and we said our goodbyes. That left me with nothing but my thoughts again, and it was a place I couldn't say that I was enjoying being in. I must have dozed off there for a minute, and when I came to, someone was looking at me.
Hey there, kiddo.
The sky was beginning to go pink outside, and I could see the clock over his bed showing 4 a.m. I looked up to find Grandpa looking back at me, his eyes a little foggy, but overall, being conscious was a step in the right direction. He was confused, that much was obvious, and as I got my wits about me, he smiled and waved a hand in front of my face.
Yoo-hoo, anybody home? Seems like maybe you ought to be in the bed instead of me. I'm not sure all your dogs are barking quite yet.
No, I don't think they are. Gramps, you collapsed again. We're at the hospital. Grandpa nodded as he looked around.
That would explain all the tubes and the beeping machinery. When are they going to let me go? I really didn't want to miss my show this weekend.
Grandpa, when were you going to tell me that you had cancer? Grandpa stiffened a little, seeming to understand that the cat was out of the bag, and turned to me as if assessing how upset I was.
I guess they told you.
Hard not to when you're in the hospital for collapsing due to lack of lung function. The question is, why didn't you tell me? Did you think I was going to leave? Did you think that just because the laughs were over, I was going to abandon you? Grandpa shook his head.
No, that wasn't what I was worried about. It's my job to protect others, and if I can't do that, then what good am I? I wasn't afraid that you would leave me, but I was afraid of distracting you from duties that will very soon be yours.
What?
When I die, it will be up to you to take over protecting the city. I was hoping I'd have a few more years to train you, but it appears that we're out of time. You'll have to lean on the people who are here to help you, and they'll probably have to lean on you. Be good to them, and don't blame yourself for what's happening to me. You couldn't have stopped it any more than I could have. Been looking for some way to fix it for a while now, but can't seem to find any way to cure what's inside me. I may have some options, but most of them are just as bleak as dying. I wanted your memories of me to be good ones, to be happy, and I didn't want you to remember me as a sick old man dying in bed.
I didn't know what to say to that. I reached out and took Grandpa's hand, and the two of us just sat in a companionable silence for a while. We didn't say much. There was really nothing to say. The two of us were scared and didn't know what the future might hold, but I knew I wanted to be there for Grandpa when the time came. I picked my head up when I heard a ruckus out in the hallway. Someone was explaining to someone that they couldn't just go in there, and a familiar voice was telling them that they couldn't stop her.
My fiancé is there with his grandfather, a man I have known since I was a child. I will go in and see him, and you cannot stop me.
Ma'am, if he's in there, You have to understand there's protocols for this. I can't just let you in dressed, well, like that. The hospital has rules, and you can't just do whatever you want. Now I'm going to have to ask you to... He made a noise then, a weird, grunting, high-pitched noise that made me think he had probably tried to grab her.
Touch me again, and you'll be in a heightened state of something, though it probably won't be sadness.
We went to stand in the memorial garden after that, both John and I thinking it might be a good idea to get Glimmer out of sight. I brought them up to speed on what was going on, and all of us, even Frankie, seemed to feel the gravity of the situation. Grandpa might leave the hospital, but he probably wasn't going to be the same old man that we had all grown to love. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure what to do about it. John assured me that he would be there for me if I needed him, and Glimmer said that she would always be there for me if I needed her. Frankie said that she would help too, though she was new to our problems and our little family, so she probably didn't understand what exactly she was agreeing to. We sat and talked for a little while, the sun coming up over the edge of the garden, before John and Glimmer decided to take their leave. I went back inside and returned to Grandpa's room to find him asleep. That was good. Let the old man get his sleep. The next few days, weeks, or maybe even months were probably going to be messy.
I want to come with you.
It was the earliest I had ever seen Glimmer come out of the woods, and I was honestly touched that she wanted to come out bad enough to risk the sun. Grandpa and I had been preparing to go to dinner with my parents and my uncle. It was something we'd been planning for a while, a way that Grandpa could tell them what was going on without scaring them too much. I had to figure that most of them had expected the old man would eventually croak, but it was still something we needed to do. It was also going to be a 3-ring circus that I did not want Glimmer to be a part of. Glimmer's nature was that of a warrior, and I was often glad for it. As someone who relied on magic over muscle, I was often glad to have a barbarian princess at my side who could put down threats 3 times her size without batting an eye, but this was not going to be one of those times. She wanted to protect Grandpa and me from my family, and such things could go very badly if my very opinionated fiancé met my very boisterous mother. And for someone I had seen gut brown bears out in the middle of the woods, it was just about the cutest thing I had ever seen.
You can't stop me. If I have to follow you all the way, there I'll go with you.
Honey, this is going to be bad. This is not how I want you to meet my parents, and for them to remember you. There will be other times for this, but right now, I just want to survive. When all this is done, we may have some time to go meet my parents formally in a place where they're not going to immediately hate you. Tonight, however, I want you to stay here. Please? I added, as if the pleasantry would make the medicine any easier to swallow. She looked ready to argue about it, but then finally shook her head and kissed me on the cheek.
You can be a particularly infuriating male sometimes. It's not as if I would bash your mother's head in if she were to insult me.
I'm not so sure about that. My mother can be pretty insulting. She kissed me on my mouth then, and the kiss was full of heat.
Come on, I'm not getting any younger, less sick in here,
Grandpa yelled from the cab of the truck. I blushed, gave her a last hug, and climbed in, telling her I would tell her about it later that night.
You'd better, or else I might bust your head in.
With that, we pulled out of the driveway and began to head towards Javier's Mexican experience. Javier's was a place that we liked to go for special events. It was a place for anniversaries and for birthdays, and I figured the atmosphere might make the news a little easier to swallow. I was hoping so, at least. I hoped that my mother and my uncle wouldn't make a scene in the middle of a place they liked to eat regularly. Grandpa coughed beside me, and I cast a quick look at him as we headed out. Grandpa, well, he had deteriorated in the last couple of weeks. His mobility was almost non-existent, but he had insisted on walking to the truck all by himself. It had taken him about 45 minutes to do so, and I had insisted that he bring his cane. He didn't want to. He said that was for old people, but I was pretty insistent, and he finally gave up. It wasn't his legs. His legs were still as hardy as ever. It was his lungs. Grandpa just got out of breath so easily these days. He seemed to be fine as long as he was sitting, but when he was moving, it was hard for him to get any wind in him. I hated to see him this way, but I knew it was only going to get worse before it got better.
"How do you think they're going to take the news?"
he asked suddenly, as we turned onto the road that would take us to Javier's. Hard to say. You should have told them months ago. I get not telling me. You were afraid I would fuss over you, but you should have at least told Mom. You know how she worries about you. He chuckled and then coughed and spat into his handkerchief.
"It wasn't you I was worried about fussing over me. Your mother is a world-class fusser. She would have come down to live with me if she knew. She would have made your life hell, I'm not afraid to tell you."
I lived with her for 22 years. I remember how much of a pain she can be sometimes. We rode in silence for a few minutes, both of us dreading what was about to come.
"It reminds me of my own grandmother's passing,"
Grandpa said all at once. I thought you weren't there for that.
"Oh, I wasn't. I was too young to be there for anything like that, but I wished I had been. The idea that your grandmother died in such a way always made me feel terrible. She needed somebody to be with her. She had been with so many others when they were dying that it only seemed right that she had somebody to hold her hand and tell her everything was going to be okay."
I reached over and grabbed his wrinkled hand. "When the time comes, I want to be there for you." He smiled at me.
I would expect nothing less. When a teacher dies, they say the student truly comes into their power. I would hope that a little of mine would pass on to you, so that the transition would be even smoother."
I wiped my eyes as I steered with my knees, our hands gripped together as we drove to the restaurant. Something I've always wondered about, I asked, more to change the subject than anything. Why didn't Mom or any of her siblings get powers?
"Hard to say. Sometimes it skips a generation. I got lucky. I had my grandmother to help me figure out mine, but I had honestly expected that either your mother or your uncle would have seen a little of the gift. I think your mother has a little, but it's nothing more than a lucky guess now and then, or maybe a spark of intuition sometimes. I think she resented it. She always rolled her eyes at me when I talked about exercising spirits or using my gift."
But she's seen you use them. She knew you had actual powers.
"Didn't she?"
Grandpa shrugged and coughed again.
When she was a child, yes. When she was a child, she still wanted to learn, but when it didn't come to her as it had come to me, she decided it was a trick. It was something I was using to mock her, and she grew disinterested. Frank thought it was neat when he was younger, but he stopped believing in magic long before she did. What is it that they always say?
Strong men make easy times, and easy times make weak men, and weak men make hard times, etc., etc. My kids grew up with a distinct lack of magic. Their lives were so different from mine, and maybe that's a good thing. It led you to discover power, and I think that might be even better." "Why do you say that?" I asked, as we turned into Javier's. Your mother can be hard enough to deal with without magic talents." I laughed as I pulled into the handicap spot and went around to help him. His cane crunched against the gravel as we walked, and it would be easy to take a tumble out here if I weren't paying attention. I came in right behind him, the door revealing a festive atmosphere. Families were laughing, enjoying each other's company, and it was an interesting contrast from the group we were going to meet. It's weird, but I don't think I've talked much about my family. Grandpa is generally the most genial of them, and it only gets worse from there. My mother is a large woman in her late 50s. She was a nurse, but she managed to retire a little early so that she could spend more time on her favorite hobby, which I assume is spite. I know that's a terrible thing to say about your mother, but, well, it fits. I was afraid to play sports as a kid because the couple of times I did, she would fight with officials or other parents. She had no time for anything that wasn't extracurricular or something that would help me get into college. She was an attack helicopter of a parent, and my dad mostly just sat back and let her do what she wanted. My Uncle Frank is okay, I guess, but he's always had a high opinion of himself, and it makes him insufferable sometimes. He's a college professor, a teacher at one of those schools you have to have competitive grades and a glowing transcript to get into, and he likes to spend family dinners discussing things that none of us can do more than nod and make thoughtful noises about. Luckily, Aunt Kay hadn't made it, so I wouldn't have to listen to her brag about going here or there with her new boyfriend. She was a travel blogger in the same way that I was a grand wizard, and all 12 of her followers had really inflated her ego. Mostly, she just attached herself to men and then went with them until they got tired of her, something that usually didn't take long. I love them, all of them, really I do, but sometimes I just want to scream. By the look on Grandpa's face, you could tell he was preparing for trouble. But they were his children, and he owed it to them to be honest with them. "Molly, Frank, good to see you. Regina," he nodded to my uncle's wife. "Rowan, always good to see you as well. I see Kay couldn't make it." "Kay is in Bermuda with one of her male friends. I swear I don't think she's stopped since the divorce. She's always off on some adventure or another." We made small talk, ordered some drinks, ordered some food, but I think they noticed something was off pretty quickly. Grandpa was sticking with water, he was eating very little, and he wasn't engaging in conversation more than he had to. The coughing was a dead giveaway too, and it didn't take long before Uncle Frank cleared his throat and put down his fork. "Dad, are you okay? You look terrible, if you don't mind me saying so. Is something wrong?" Mom looked up from her quesadilla, and as Grandpa wiped his mouth, I saw the old man steel himself for the blow. "That's actually why I've invited all of you out to eat. I've received some news, and I think you all should be aware of it, and what's to come after it." I saw my mother and my uncle sit forward a little, their eyes hungry and expectant. It wasn't entirely pleasant to see people you're related to look at someone like that. "It appears my time is up. I'm dying, and it's not coming slowly. I've only got a few months left, and I called you here to discuss what happens afterward. I've written in my will that each of my children receive an inheritance of $10,000 upon my death. But what I'm most concerned about is my house and the things within. They were practically looming over the table now, a pair of jackals waiting to chew the fat off a corpse. My records will go to Kay. My cast iron will go to Molly. That paintings will go to Frank. Stop dancing around it, my mom finally snapped. Who gets the house and the land? Grandpa smiled, as if he had only been waiting for her to ask. The house and everything inside it will pass to Marcus. He's stayed with me through the last few years of my life, and I want him to take my legacy when The table erupted into barely restrained upset. My uncle and mother were strenuously objecting. My aunt was trying to calm my uncle down, and my dad was eating as if nothing had happened. You're going to leave all that land to a child, my mother blustered. He'll lose it inside of a year, or he'll forget to pay taxes, or my uncle half yelled. It's too much responsibility, my mother added. He isn't ready for something like this. The glasses shuddered when Grandpa slammed his hand down on the table, and both of his children leaned away like they'd been struck. It seemed the old man still had some fire left in him. Now, that is enough. This is my decision, and I've made it clear to my lawyer that if any of you make a fuss, you get nothing. Marcus has been taking care of me, and we've grown very close. I think he deserves the knowledge I've gathered over the years, and I believe he can use it more effectively than any of you. Uncle Frank sat back, grumbling as he rolled his eyes. But Mom's eyes suddenly got big as she looked at me, really looked at me. She looked like she'd never seen me before, and she started shaking her head as she turned back to Grandpa. Oh my God, you've taught him, haven't you? You've brainwashed him into thinking he can do all those silly things you used to do when Frank and I were children. It's not real, Mark. It's all just cheap tricks. He's convinced you you're special, but it's all a lie. You'll find that out after he's gone. He takes all the tricks with him, and then you'll need someone to clean up the pieces. Well, don't worry. Stop it, Mom, I shouted, standing up so she'd stop looming over me. You wanted me to go live with Grandpa. You wanted me out of the house so I'd stop embarrassing you and your other successful children, who aren't there, by the way. Well, I went. I helped. I learned things, and now I have a purpose. The things Grandpa's offering aren't free, Mom. They have expectations. Expectations you can't begin to understand. I understand them. They're my burden to bear. I found something real. Grandpa has made me into more than I was, and I'm finally ready to do something with my life. Uncle Frank threw up his hands and said he was leaving. My aunt trailed behind him, and Grandpa rose as he said it was time for us to leave too. He grabbed the bill, saying he would take care of it, but as he stumped to the front, he turned and looked at my mother severely. This is my will, Molly, and for once in your life, please respect that. He paid the bill. I helped him to the truck, and we rolled out of the parking lot in silence. Well, that went about as well as I'd expected, Grandpa said. I didn't say anything, just kept my eyes on the road and drove on. They may contest the will, but I doubt it. I kept silent, the trees flying past. Well, come on, boy, speak your mind. You could have told me you were leaving it all to me, I said sullenly. Grandpa shrugged. What? And ruin the surprise? Why would you leave the house and the land to me? I'm 24, Gramps. I have no business owning anything at this point. They were right to be mad. It should be theirs. That house isn't just a house. It's a sanctuary. It's warded against the things that will hunt you when you start fighting them. And it's no good to any of them. If you are to keep fighting, you'll need a place like it. A good night's sleep is sometimes a hard thing to find, and you can't put a price tag on it, kid. The knowledge and the weapons there will also be of use to you when they can no longer help me. We rolled along in silence after that. I was thankful for the gift and the vote of confidence, but I hoped Grandpa hadn't made unnecessary trouble for me. I intended to continue his fight. It wasn't what I'd been trained for, but a time after Grandpa wasn't something I liked to dwell on. Order, order. This council meeting will come to order. The council was assembled yet again. John Marvolo, Dr. Winters, the mayor, the kid from the bus station, Sheriff Guthrie, and even the warden had made an appearance. Most of the council couldn't remember a time when he had shown up for a meeting, but it appeared that things had truly gotten dire. This was no longer a city council, but a war council, and the news wasn't good. There was another chair with someone in it, a chair that had been empty for almost as long as the warden's. The writer was rocking in his chair, his legs pulled up to his chest, and he was mumbling something low and thoughtful. He was clearly struggling with something, but none of them knew how to help him. Everyone in the room, Sheriff Guthrie included, felt a stab of pity for the man, but there was little that could be done to help him. Sheriff Guthrie, would you like to tell the council what you have discovered? Guthrie stood up, but the tone of the mayor's question made him feel uneasy. The mayor had never lost an opportunity to remind him that he was not the sheriff, but today he had not only called him by his title, but had asked him rather than told him to do something. Things had reached a head if the mayor had forgotten their little game of snipe. By my estimations, we've lost another half a mile on the borders. I went to the checkpoints yesterday, and one of them was just gone. Gone? John asked. What do you mean? Like, it was gone. The town has its own boundaries, its own borders, and it seems to be shrinking. Kashmir is drawing in on itself so that it can protect its borders, and if it continues to draw in, we may lose some of the residential neighborhoods soon. Save the hand, detach the fingers, the writer babbled ominously. How long could this take? The mayor asked, ignoring the babbling writer. Hard to say, Guthrie said. Weeks, days, maybe hours if the town feels threatened enough. It will protect itself, and it feels like it'll cut us off if it needs to. We need a plan. We're losing ground, and it's not all external either. What makes you say that? The warden asked. I've seen the evidence, Guthrie said, and he brought a hand down on the table for emphasis. Someone is leaving these pamphlets and books. Someone is leaving the graffiti around town. Someone is gathering the others together. This is a cancer, and it is spreading. Wait, what graffiti? Dr. Winters asked. I haven't heard of any graffiti. Guthrie sat down and nodded to the kid. Tell him what happened on your turf, nonetheless. The kid from the bus station sighed as he stood up and addressed the council. We had some punks do a little bit of spray painting around the back of the bus station. I told the sheriff about it because I'd hoped he could find out who had done it. So far, there have been no arrests." He stared at Guthrie as he finished, sitting down and crossing his arms. "What did the graffiti say?" Dr. Winter inquired. "All prepare for the coming of the bright. We don't even know if they did it. It could just be some kids." "I don't care if it's the ladies' auxiliary," the mayor said as he cut over the kid. "If the bright is involved, then it is treason. When you find whoever this is, I want them tried and put in Stagview." The warden lifted an eyebrow at that. "If it's a bunch of kids, Mayor, then you'll have to build me a new wing for juvenile offenders. My prison doesn't hold people under the age of 18. "Then Guthrie will have to hold them till all of this blows over. Either way, I want anyone suspected of being part of the bright off the street. Do I make myself clear?" "Mayor, I only have so many holding cells," Sheriff Guthrie started, when the mayor slammed his hand down on the table. It made a much louder sound than Guthrie's had, and brought everyone assembled to silence. "Do I make myself clear?" he shouted, and everyone nodded and said he was crystal clear. "Good. The next thing upon the agenda is a report from our favorite therapist. Dr. Winters, you have the floor." Dr. Winters stood up and smiled at the assembled council. "I received a report from my younger brother, Mr. Seraph. He's been accosted by the Bright while he was out on matters of acquisition. They wounded him rather badly, and it raises some concerns about the effectiveness of me and my siblings if it comes to a fight. I don't need to tell any of you around the table, but my brother and I are demonic in nature." The warden looked as if he wanted to object, but Dr. Winters put a hand out to silence him, and to her surprise, he sat back. "I don't know how it would be a surprise. Most of you have seen us in our true forms. However you might feel about it, we protect this town when it needs to be protected. This is our home. At least, the warden and I feel that way. We have many different people in this town, and our only real connection is that we love it, and it feels like home to us. I'm not saying that we won't stand with you when the time comes to fight. My brother and I agree on that much, but if they employ these weapons against us, then we may not be as effective as we normally are." "Even a giant can be laid low with a rock," the writer mumbled before looking at his fingernails and seeming to find something amiss. "What sort of weapons did they employ against your brother?" Guthrie asked. "Did he describe them?" Dr. Winters seemed to be trying to find the right words. He said they used books with light inside that hurt people. It seems fitting for a cult that worships the bright to use a bright light, I guess, but the nature of it may be otherworldly, and it could just as easily hurt people as it could us. Worse still, this may be how they're converting people. The light hurts us because we're also not of this world, but if you stand before that light, you might be turned to their way of thinking. I think everyone should be cautious if we engage these people." "Engaging them seems like something we'll have to do, whether we want to or not," John Marvolo said, as he steepled his fingers before his eyes. "I've been told by a lot of people that they've attempted to get in their minds through the radio and the television. What worries me is that for every 5 people that may have told me about it, there's 1 or 2 that haven't. We don't really know how insidious these people are just yet, and we should all be on our guard. What's our plan of defense if they do get through the borders? Do we have anything we can rely on to help us?" "There are always people willing to defend the town," Dr. Winters said as color rose in her cheeks. "In time of crisis, the town always comes together. But, if you're looking for names, the wizards that live on the outskirts will certainly come to help us. The botanical garden will likely rise to the occasion too, and I'm sure there are others who would wish to stand in defense of the town. Let's not forget, this is the South as well. There's likely more guns than citizens sitting in people's desks, drawers, or inside china cabinets. If the Bright tries to come at us with books full of knowledge and light, they may be pleasantly surprised when they find the end of someone's shotgun. It may be time to see who we can count on to stand and fight. Dr. Winters, I would like you to dispatch someone to go speak with the botanical gardens. You may go yourself if you choose. Tell them the situation and let them know. We may very well need their help very soon. If you could go and talk to the wizards you spoke of as well, it would be greatly appreciated. I can, and I will. I pray we will not need their help, but no one can turn away allies at this point. Sheriff Guthrie, make sure that all your deputized men are armed and take them to the range when you can. If they're going to be firing weapons, then I want them to be accurate. Find out who has specialized firearms training. If we could put a few men on the roof of some buildings with rifles, that would be outstanding. The rest of you, sound out the townspeople that you know and find out who will stand with us when the time comes. John, maybe you can get on the radio and tell your people about what's happening. Build up a little town spirit so that when the time comes, we won't be outnumbered. Can do, John said. Town spirit is what my radio show is all about. Doc, does the writer have anything? Any information he might give us would be useful. I know he knows more than he's letting on, and I know he has wisdom locked away in there somewhere. But the writer sat up and yelled, his voice cutting over the mayor's as the other residents of the table leaned back a little bit. The man was hyperventilating into his knees, his screams coming through the space between his legs, and as he parted them, he looked over his knees and said something unexpected. We can't fight them. I can barely fight them, and I created this town. They're in my head. They're always in my head. They crawl across my skin like bugs. They burrow into my brain like maggots, just looking for tasty bits of flesh to gnaw on. I've been holding them at bay all this time, pushing them away as they try to get in. I don't know how much longer I can do it. You need to do something, and you need to do it quickly. If something isn't done, that I don't know if I can hold them back much longer. Please, 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 please. He went right on yelling for another few minutes, and his pleases got quieter as he finally rested his head against his knees and was silent. The room was quiet as well, everyone looking around as if expecting someone to speak. Make alliances, the mayor finally said when no one else spoke. Set your guards, arm them, prepare them, and get anyone and everyone ready for a fight that we may not be able to win. Anyone who fights, anyone who lives in this town, needs to know that if the town falls to these bastards, then there may not be a town worth living in anymore. Those who side with the Bright are traitors, and they need to be treated as such. Traitors are not held in captivity, Sheriff Guthrie. Traitors are not given fair trials. Traitors are executed in the streets, where others can watch and think better of their actions. We are at war, everyone, and we need to start acting like it. Sheriff Guthrie, I want a curfew in effect from this day forward. Anyone not working after 9 p.m. is to be indoors, no exception. Anyone found on the street after 9 p.m. is to be questioned and put in a holding cell. If you believe they are a traitor, then you do what must be done. Marvelo, announce this over your radio show as well. People need to know what's at stake, and it's time they started hearing it from us. Go about your business, be prepared, and be ready at a moment's notice. The city council broke up then. going their own way as Dr. Winter helped the rider out of the council chamber. The time for talk was over, it seemed. The time for action was now. Welcome to the program, Kashmir. This is John Marvolo, the voice of Kashmir, and I'm so glad that you've come to sit with me today. Better put on my serious voice for this next one, because this one is pretty serious business. The mayor has instituted a state of emergency. Kashmir is under martial law until further notice. A curfew has been put into effect, and everyone is reminded to be off the streets by 9:30 p.m. until first light in the morning. Those found on the streets will be questioned, and questioned harshly, and may find themselves detained for further questioning. The mayor has given our own Sheriff Guthrie and his deputies the power to detain and interrogate those they feel may be connected to the strangers. Citizens are reminded to be respectful to the newly deputized officers. They have just as much power as our existing police force and will be allowed to question and detain so long as they have the authority of Sheriff Guthrie. Be safe, Kashmir, and enjoy the sound of... Sheriff Guthrie turned the radio off and sighed as he leaned forward in his chair. It was done then. Sheriff Guthrie had never wanted to plunge the town into martial law, but what other choice did he really have? Those Bright Church people were getting very violent, and it was only a matter of time until someone let them in, or they managed to get in on their own. He had to stop this, or he would risk losing the town he loved so much. Guthrie just hoped he was doing the right thing. The idea of interrogating and maybe even executing citizens made him feel sick to his stomach. Everyone here felt like a friend. Everyone here almost felt like family, but, and he had to keep reminding himself of this, family did not betray you to a bunch of religious fanatics. Family stood by you during thick and thin, and they were there when things got tough. Family would be the one armed to the teeth, standing beside him when these Bright bastards finally decided to come and try the line. Guthrie just hoped there would be enough of them when the time came. Someone knocked on his door, and he looked up to see Deputy Parks looking through the pebbled glass window and looking lost. "Come in." Parks shook his head and nodded to the sheriff. "You told me to let you know when it was time for the daily barricade checks. Do you want me to go, or would you prefer to go yourself? I can go if you need me to, Sheriff. You look about done in." "No," Guthrie half growled as he pulled himself up from his chair. "I'll go. I need you and Woods to do a thing for me, if you have the time." "Well, sure. You know we always got the time for you." "Round up the new recruits and find a time to take all of them down to the range. I need to know who's a crack shot, who's got what guns, and who's got what training. The mayor wants men with rifles, and I think that's a pretty good idea. If we can get some riflemen on top of one of those buildings, then maybe we can get some snipers to take out those people before they get into town." Parks nodded. "Absolutely, Sheriff. You know, I've won the turkey shoot the last 3 or 4 years running, and Woods got an accommodation from Sheriff Masterson on his marksmanship. If some of these guys are rusty, I bet we can give them some pointers and help them get in line." "That'd be just fine. You two take them down and make sure that everybody shoots at least 2 or 3 courses of fire. I don't want them getting jumpy when the bullets start flying." "Sheriff, you don't think it's going to come to that, do you?" Parks asked, almost hopefully. "I don't know, Deputy, but I sure don't want to get caught hanging in the breeze when it does." He patted Parks on the shoulder as he walked out, but then he paused and turned back to look at him. "Parks, am I doing the right thing here?" Parks smiled and nodded. "You're defending the town, Sheriff. I think that's just about the only thing you can do in this situation." Guthrie nodded and gave him a less than confident grin. "Thanks, Deputy. I think that's what I needed to hear." He left then to do his rounds, standing a little taller and walking a little steadier than he had since the meeting that afternoon. Remember to report anyone acting out of the ordinary. Anyone you suspect may be connected to the Bright needs to go speak with the sheriff and his deputies. I know this may be a touchy subject. The people of Kashmir have always been close, but if someone has allied themselves with the Bright, then they are a danger to this town and a danger to you as well. Do not let old relationships draw you into trouble. Whether it's a parent, a sibling, even a friend, don't be afraid to let somebody know that they may be in over their head. Sheriff Guthrie and his deputies just want to talk to them. They just want to make sure that everyone is safe. Miss Blair sighed as she put the new hours of operation up in her window. It was going to be difficult to run her business since she could only be open until 9 o'clock now. Was really going to cut into her evening crowd, but Kashmir was a pretty early-to-bed sort of place anyway. The only real traffic she had was a few late-night guys that showed up around 10 or 11 o'clock. Miss Blair always closed around midnight so that they could get a bite to eat before they went home, but she supposed they would have to find somewhere else to get their grub. She was just putting it up when she heard the bell ring, and then came a familiar face. It was Candace, and she was without her sweetheart again. Miss Blair was getting a little concerned for Earl. She hadn't seen him in quite some time, but she was pretty sure that Candace hadn't eaten him, though not completely. People had seen him. He had been going about his business at the graveyard, but he had been very distant since his trouble in the woods. He didn't talk as much as he used to. He didn't smile as much as he used to. And he hadn't seemed like himself in quite a while. As Candace sat down, Miss Blair brought her a plate of lamb chops and mixed vegetables, which were her favorite. "Business been doing good lately?" Miss Blair asked as she came to sit with her. This time of the afternoon, it was pretty slow, before the dinner rush, and she had a few minutes before other people would start showing up. She wanted to talk to the woman a little bit. "No, better than usual. It picks up a little bit, but it's never going to be something I can retire to Costa Rica with. Not sure I would want to anyway. I like this town a lot. I don't see leaving it, even for a tropical paradise." "Well, that's good to hear. I know this town is sure fond of you, and as is our favorite gravedigger." She had expected Candace to glow a little, the way she usually did. But today, she looked a little bit sad. "It's hard to tell anymore. I haven't really seen him since that disastrous camping trip." That surprised Miss Blair, and she was a woman who was rarely surprised. "Don't tell me some of the spark has gone out already?" she asked. "I don't know. He's very secretive these days. Not at all himself. I'm worried about him. I'm worried he might have been..." She looked around and lowered her voice. "He might have been affected by one of those strangers." That sent a chill down Miss Blair's spine. Surely Earl was made of sterner stuff than that. He couldn't have succumbed to it. He just couldn't have. "Have you told anyone about these suspicions?" she asked. "No one," Candace said with all seriousness. "I'm afraid he'd be detained. Or worse." As if on cue, John Marvolo said, "Remember, everyone, talking to the police when you suspect your friends isn't being a snitch. It's an integral part of this town's safety. If you see something, say something. Now, let's get back to the music." A couple of customers walked in, and when Miss Blair came back from serving them, Candace was gone. The only sign that she had been there was a tip and an empty plate. Remember to report any strangers you might encounter in town. The safety of Kashmir is of the utmost importance as we try to sort out this new threat from the outside. Kashmir is in no way saying it doesn't want new friends in town. Quite the opposite. Kashmir has always been a town that welcomes outsiders with open arms. But these strangers are not here to be part of our fellowship. They're here to cause trouble, and no matter what they may have told you, their intentions are evil. Those of you who may have listened to them need to wake up. They do not have this town's best interest at heart. So if you see anyone who doesn't belong poking around, you need to contact. Angela reached over and turned off the radio as silence fell amidst the book club. All of them looked at each other as if somehow this was what they had been expecting, and there were quite a few of them to do that. Their numbers had swollen to around 23, and it was all due in large part to the effects of Angela, Brandon, and their newest member, who still seemed unsure about himself. "Everyone," Brandon said, "this is what we warned you about. As our movement gets bigger, the town will try to fight us off. If you are taken, the best thing you can do is pretend you don't know what they're talking about. This town and its council can spout off all they want, but they aren't prepared to actually execute their citizens. I suspect most of it will be holding cells or maybe a transfer to Stragview." "Is that something you're willing to die for?" Tyler asked as he sipped coffee and looked speculative. "It's something that all of us should be willing to die for," Angela said as she cut him off. "This is what the movement is all about. You know that the Bright have a place here, but nobody else seems to want to accept that. We have to show them that they're wrong. We have to show them that they're mistaken. Above all else, we have to show them that the line the council has drawn is evil and that their time is over. You've been quiet, Brother Earl. What do you think about all this?" Earl looked up from his plate of hors d'oeuvres that he now didn't seem to have any appetite for. He looked as haunted as the writer these days, and he appeared troubled, even to those assembled here. Most of them believed he would probably not last until the Bright arrived, but he was integral to their operation. He had come to Angela about 2 weeks ago, and when she realized what he was, she had wept with joy. The rest of them heard the Bright through the TV or the radio, but Earl heard it in his head. His brain would try to fight it sometimes, try to reassert itself, but it never got very far. Earl was their ham radio, their direct connection to Brother Thomas and the Bright, and they were all very grateful to him. "Brother Thomas says it won't be long now. He's nearly broken the guardian of this town, and soon they'll be in." "How can we help him?" Angela asked, as she looked around the room and nodded at those assembled. "The sooner the guardian falls, the sooner he can take the town. We need to help him. We need to assist him in getting rid of what guards this town." "And how can we do that?" Tyler asked from his usual spot. By silencing him ourselves. We have to get rid of the writer." There was a silence after that, a deep and all-encompassing silence, but nobody spoke out against the idea. They all knew that it was the will of Brother Thomas, and it must be done, and it would need to be sooner rather than later. The book club had laid out their plans on the table in Angela's living room. Most of them had gone home. Only the core members were really needed for the plan. Angela had stayed because, of course, it was her house. Brandon and Tyler had also stayed, and Earl seemed to be heading the meeting as he stood at the start of the map. Earl had risen in their standing fairly quickly for someone who was a recent convert, but both Brandon and Angela had confirmed that what he was hearing was the Bright, and Brother Thomas had told them that he was their conduit. He would speak with the voice of the Bright, and anyone who stood against him would be excommunicated. That had sort of settled matters as far as most of them were concerned. "So, are we all in agreement on what we must do?" Earl asked as the three looked on. All three nodded, and then Earl turned his face towards Angela. "I will be listening for messages from Brother Thomas, He may not be able to tell us exactly where the rider is, but he should be able to give us a general location. Earl nodded before turning to Brandon. I'll keep an eye out for him while I'm on my route. Most of my job is reconnaissance, as I try to determine places he goes every day. Earl nodded again, and then he turned to Tyler. I'll keep my truck empty for transport. The truck will hide what we're doing, and if we put hands on him, we can throw him in the back as quickly as possible. Then, we should avoid any detection. Fortunately for us, Earl said as he nodded again, the rider is a bit of a misunderstood character. He wanders around the town and he says things that don't make sense to a lot of people. He is prone to babbling and to talking about things that no one quite understands. In short, he is someone you would expect to yell, and thus may be ignored when we go to get him. The paper on the table was a map of the town. Brandon and Tyler had marked places on the map that they often saw the rider during the day. Brandon was very active in the town, riding around to deliver meals on his route in the early morning and the late afternoon. Tyler had also encountered the rider a lot as he went on his garbage route, and he knew his morning routine fairly well. Not a day goes by that I don't see him in an argument with the sheriff, or I have to stop suddenly because he's crossed the road without looking. He tends to hover in places as well, just kind of sitting around as he impedes traffic and pedestrians, Tyler said, as he pointed out a few of the places on the map. Earl had added a few of his own locations, seeing the rider when he took breaks from the graveyard, or when he and Candace went out sometimes. He and Candace hadn't been out in quite some time, and there was a part of him that screamed for sanity and further return of something normal. That part of Earl that now belonged to the Bright pushed it back down, though, and told it to be quiet. This was his body now, and he would use it as he saw fit. Given the timetable that we've presented, I think it might be best if we grab him in the early evening or the late afternoon. He tends to wander around Old Town at that point. And Brandon, you said you've seen him around the vacant lot near dusk. Yeah, he usually goes out there to hang out and watch the sunset. What are we going to do with him once we get him? What do you mean? Earl asked. I mean, what are we supposed to do with him? Is this an interrogation? Are we going to have to kill him? What does Brother Thomas want us to do? Earl shook his head slowly. Brother Thomas was very clear that he did not want the man killed. He believes that the rider and the town have a very special connection. He wants him alive, but he is protecting the town, and that has to stop. We have to bring down his mental defenses or possibly convert him. We have the wine and we have the books, so it is possible that we could turn him to our side. Imagine that, Tyler said, almost reverently. If we could turn him to our side, then all the defenses he's put up for the town would be ours. Maybe we could put everyone out that doesn't want the Bright here. Maybe we could even use it to help the people be turned. One step at a time, Earl said warningly. We don't even know if we can convert him. Brother Thomas has been very clear that the man's mind is strange. He's not like other people. He may be impossible to convert. He may fight us. He may even win if he fights us. We have to be prepared for anything. The best thing to do would be to knock him out and transport him while he's unconscious. Does anybody have any thoughts on how we can manage that? We could just clip him in the back of the head with something. Old Town is full of pipes and garbage. We could just thump him in the back of the head and then bring him with us, Brandon said, and mimed swinging a pipe as he did so. Not bad, but the problem is that if we hit him too hard, it might kill him, Tyler said. I've got some stuff we used to use for horses when my dad still owned them. It's a little old, but I don't know why a horse tranquilizer wouldn't work on him. I don't want to use old medicine, Earl had said as he shook his head slowly. That might also kill him, and we can't have that. Maybe we could get our hands on some newer stuff. Some stuff that we know is potent and safe. I could probably get my hands on something to knock him out, Angela said, and everyone turned to look at her as she began to get flustered.
I mean, my husband has a prescription for muscle relaxers, and I still have a prescription for sleep aid. Whatever we use, it has to be fast-acting. We don't want to kill him, but if he's awake enough to fight back, that could very easily be a problem. They talked a little more about it, spitballing ideas and trying to figure out what they could do with him once they had him. It was finally decided that they would keep him in a maintenance shed at the depot while Tyler parked his truck. Each of them would go to feed him or provide some money so that Tyler could get him something to eat. Earl reiterated that they did not want to kill him, but that conversion would be the best way to go about it. "You guys should go," Angela said, as she realized what time it was. "My husband will be home soon, and if he comes home to find all of you here, he's going to have questions." They broke up right about then, all of them saying they would be in touch and there would be plans shared amongst everybody during the next book club. Tyler and Brandon left right away, but Earl lingered as he got some things together. Angela had known Earl for quite a while, but she had never seen him like this. Earl was always a happy, good-natured fellow. Seeing him speak like this and make plans like these was more than a little scary, and it made her wonder if they were doing the right thing. "I know what you're going to say," Earl said as he zipped up his backpack, "but it really is the best thing. If he's with them when they decide to defend the town, then it's going to be a huge issue. Like I keep saying, we don't want to hurt him. The Brat loves him very much and wants his town to love them as well. We need to convince him that it's in the best interests of Kashmir and everyone here that they fall into place." I wish I had your confidence," Angela said, picking up dishes and taking them to the sink. Earl slung his backpack over his shoulder and gave her a slightly lopsided smile. "It's not confidence. I trust in the Brat, and it hasn't let me down yet. Put your trust in the Brat, Angela. Put aside your questions and misgivings and just trust in the Brat." I do with all my heart, but even you have to wonder sometimes if what we're doing is the right thing." He put a hand on her shoulder, and as he looked into her eyes, she suddenly thought she saw him twitch. It was as if something was hiding behind those eyes and just begging to be let out. It was as if something was trying to claw its way free, but it just couldn't quite make it. For a moment, she saw the Earl that she had known for all those years, and his frantic face made her wonder yet again what it was they were doing. Whatever it was gone in an instant, and this new and very confident Earl stood before her again. Such things are not for us to worry about. We do the will of the Brat, and that is enough. He left then, and when her husband came home, he found dinner ready, and his wife looking very pleased and very confident. When the Bright was in your life, it was easy to find contentment.
"Morning, Sheriff." Sheriff Guthrie looked up from his second cup of coffee and waved at Tyler Durden as he drove his garbage truck into Old Town. Something tickled at the back of his brain, something that said today wasn't an Old Town day, but he dismissed it as the garbage truck rolled on down the road. People could change up the routes. There was no law against it. It was just nerves. Things had felt too tense the last couple of days. He hadn't felt like himself since the council meeting. That was such a strange phrase, not feeling like yourself. Who else would you feel like? Guthrie didn't have any experience feeling like anyone but himself. He wouldn't know what any of that felt like in the first place. "That's weird," Parks said as he chewed over his bear claw. He had Parks for another couple of days, and then it would be Wood's turn to work with the sheriff. The two of them seemed to work better when separated, even though he knew they did a lot of hanging out on their own. That was unfair, he supposed. They had done a great job of training the new recruits. He had assumed it would be a crap show when he told the two of them to take the new deputies to the range, but they had really impressed him. He now had 7 men claiming to have some experience with a rifle, and their range scores definitely reflected that. One of them was Parks, which was a pleasant surprise. He had told him that when the time came, he would be the leader of that little group, and the two of them were already looking at positions for the snipers to sit and wait. "What's weird?" Guthrie asked, as he winced when the coffee burned his lip. "Well, he only does Old Town on Wednesdays and Fridays. It's a big route, I'll grant you that, but I've never seen him there on a Thursday before." Guthrie nodded, feeling like the deputy had read his mind. "Well, I suppose maybe he had a lot to do today. Maybe he's going on vacation Friday, and he wanted to go ahead and get it out of the way." Parks gave Guthrie a look that told him that was a great joke, and when the sheriff didn't laugh, Parks just shook his head. "Tyler Durden take a vacation? Never gonna happen. Pretty sure he hasn't done so much as taken a sick day since he got those trucks. From what I hear, he's terrified that someone is going to pick up a couple of cheap garbage trucks and give him some competition. I don't foresee it happening. I just don't think a lot of people are that ambitious. Plus, if you think about it, everyone in town has a spot, and that's his. It would be like me being worried about someone coming into town and being a better deputy than me. It's possible, probably even likely, but the town just doesn't allow that sort of thing. Once you find your spot, you're stuck." That made Guthrie chew over his coffee for a moment, and not just because it was very likely yesterday's reheated swill. Everybody talked about the town as if it were a living thing, as if it were something with decision-making power. Suddenly, he didn't like it so much, and it made him feel a little weird the more he thought about it. People usually talked about towns as if they were living things, but in this case, Guthrie thought it might actually be true. The town was certainly different from other towns. That much was undeniable. Does it seem different to you lately, Parks?" Guthrie asked suddenly. "Different, Sheriff? Like something might be about to happen. Like we might be at the eye of the storm, just waiting for the winds to start to blow again. It's been very calm lately, other than the martial law, and that's a little bit unsettling. We haven't had any more checkpoints go under, and we haven't had any more sightings of the strangers since last week. Feels like something's going on, like they're mustering their forces for an attack, and I just don't like it." Parks didn't say anything. He just watched the garbage truck roll on and got a look on his face that Guthrie might call speculation. Guthrie turned as an unfamiliar sound cut across his ears and caught the tail end of someone on a beat-up old bike. He saw the cyclist as he went past and realized he knew the kid. Not well, it was just someone he'd seen around, but he knew that he had seen him often. He worked for that bike meal delivery company, but he didn't think he had ever seen him out quite this early. He had the basket on the back of his bike with the logo on it, and Guthrie wondered who was ordering food this time of the morning. It all seemed a little strange, but he supposed life in Kashmir was usually strange. "Any word on when the council thinks the strangers will attack the town?" Guthrie shook himself out of his malaise, pulling his eyes away from the cyclist to look at his deputy. "I haven't heard anything definitive. I realize they're being cautious, but I'm ready for all this to be over. Fighting is fighting. I've shot at people before and been shot back at, but for me, the waiting is always the worst part. It's the uncertainty. It's the not knowing when it's finally going to come. We've been at something like war for almost a year now, and I'm just ready for it to be over." "Don't fret, Sheriff," Parks told him, as he gave him what was probably supposed to be a hopeful smile. "I don't think this can go on much longer for either side. They're living out in the woods. They can't be doing too much better than us. Eventually, they'll see that it's not worth the effort, and they'll pack up and go home. I've never been part of a siege before, but I feel like there's only so long it can go on before your food runs out, and you either have to attack or go away. Guthrie nodded, thinking that made a lot of sense from a man he had never thought possessed a lot. It's just like the siege of Malta. The Knights never thought they could hold out against the Ottoman Turks, but they managed to push them off the island, and Guthrie felt like his coffee might be in danger of spewing out of his mouth. What? The siege of Malta. It's one of the most famous medieval sieges of the period. Guthrie cocked an eyebrow at his deputy. I never took you for a history buff, Parks. Parks laughed. Well, sure, everybody has hobbies. I'm sure there's all kinds of things that me and the other deputies are interested in that you would have never even thought of. Woods actually has a lot of knowledge about Civil War history. Up until about 2 years ago, he was the head of the recreation society that we had here in town. Interest kind of fell off about 5 years ago, but I think there might still be a couple of them that dress up, and Guthrie felt a shiver go up his spine as someone made a hissing noise very close to his ear. He turned his head, looking around for the source, but nothing was readily available. It sounded as if the person was standing right behind him, but he didn't see anybody within hailing distance. And the general climate of the town these days was making him jumpy. He was horrified to realize that his hand had gone down to his gun, and he took it off before an accident occurred. "Sheriff!" "Did you hear that?" he asked as he looked around. "Hear what?" Guthrie was about to describe the noise when he heard it again. It was behind him, in an alley between two buildings, and he turned to see somebody skulking there. The space between the two buildings was shadowy, the roofs creating overhangs that hid the identity of whoever was trying to get his attention. He moved a little closer, Parks coming up behind him slowly, and it wasn't until he was nearly in the alley that he saw who it was. The rider looked terrible. Whatever he'd been doing lately, he had clearly been through the ringer. He looked dirty, all his clothes covered in mud and grime, and he was missing one of his shoes. There were burdocks and seed pods in his hair, and a bruise over his left eye made the sheriff think he might have fallen down into something. His eyes were darting this way and that, and he looked even more anxious than usual. Guthrie didn't like it. It wasn't his usual neurotic mess self, and he was worried that the man was really about to lose it. "Have you seen them?" The man asked the question as if Sheriff Guthrie should already know the answer. "Seen who?" Sheriff Guthrie asked. "The spies. They're looking for me." "Spies?" Park asked with a little laugh. "What are you talking about? Who's after you?" Guthrie thought he understood, but he didn't want to jump to conclusions. The only spies that could be in town these days were for the strangers, and the idea that they might be after the rider was terrifying. He had seen the rider do some things that he didn't fully believe, and it had made him even more mindful of what was going on in town. The rider and the town were connected somehow. That much was obvious, but he had started listening a little closer to the man and taking note of the weird stuff that he said. "Whose spies are after you?" He could feel Parks turning to look at him, his eyes asking why he was buying into this, but Guthrie didn't have time to elaborate. "Spies for the strangers. They're in town and they're after me. They know that they have to get rid of me so they can breach the town. I don't know if they know it for sure, but I know that they suspect it and that it's a danger all on its own. I need help. I need you to believe me. I need... Sheriff, we've got our own fish to fry now. We don't really, have time to get mixed in whatever this is." Guthrie started to agree, but then he looked down at the man and saw the fear on his face. Whether it was true or not, the writer believed that it was, so he had to treat it with a certain amount of speculation, and a certain amount of interest. My deputy is right. We got a lot going on right now, but I want you to do something for me. I want you to go to Dr. Winters and tell her that you need to hide out for a little while. Just tell her what's going on and tell her that I sent you. Let her know that you're in danger and that it might be a good idea for you to lay low for a little while. The writer looked like he might argue with the sheriff for a moment, but his face fell as he sighed and began walking away with the most dejected posture that the lawman had ever seen. I swear, that guy gets nuttier and nuttier every year. What would the strangers want with him anyway? I think they have enough going on right now without worrying about some crazy old writer. Guthrie watched him go, wondering if maybe he should have made time for the man. It was lost a moment later. Guthrie really did have a full day, and he needed to get about it. There was a lot to do before their guests decided to arrive, and he fully intended to be ready.